Constellation, Last Stand Media's conversational podcast, is brought to you by you. If you want to learn how to support our podcast network, head to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Constellation, Last Stand Media's conversational podcast. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Moriarty. Dagan, looking good in what I would call a mustard yellow shirt. Or maybe maize? Remember the crayon maize
he went with.
Yeah.
Well, that's the name of corn.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
According to indigenous folks. You're getting woke. Colin is woke.
Oh my God, I am so woke. Dag, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you today?
Yeah, call out the bad laundry day, like resorting to the yellow t-shirt. You know what I felt like? I felt like laundry's low. We're going to be traveling for a big event soon, so everything's in the wash right now. And then I pulled this out. And I don't know. I don't mind wearing this, but for the podcast, does it look too much like skin tone? But it really doesn't. It's orangey. It's orangey enough. But everything's good. You know what? The only thing that's wrong, I got a little bit of disconcerting news last night. And maybe you guys were privy to this already. I didn't know this. So Helene and I are having Thanksgiving this year. So I'm thinking about the festivities we're having, like, I don't know, like a dozen people or something. Nothing new for us. We do this. The trend is, or the rhythm we try to get into is we try to go down to Virginia to be with you guys. Every other year we're here. So we'll have her side of the family. So it's kind of fair to both sides. So we're ramping up. So I'm thinking about the turkey. Right. So I get the nice kosher bird like I do every year, maybe 25-pounder or something, researching online about different ways to prepare the turkey. You don't want to overcook the turkey. So I'm already thinking about this. And I stumble upon this article that turkeys are cannibalistic. Never heard of this before in my entire life. And I don't even know. Now, this gets into the whole thing is like, why is it okay for us to eat them, but they can't eat each other? But I was just disturbed by it. Then in digging a little deeper, found out that apparently, now I'm still vetting this out, so for you poultry experts out there, be patient with me. All poultry apparently are cannibalistic. Ducks, geese, chickens, pheasants, and turkeys. They eat each other if left to their own devices. They think the taste of their own flesh is delicious.
Yeah, I mean, can you blame them? I mean,
turkey's
if you're
okay.
A chicken, you're like, well.
If I was a turkey,
yeah,
I would probably eat the chicken. Honestly.
Yeah. If I was a turkey, I'd be like, we're overrated. You know? Maybe good from Boar's Head or something like that. Well, that is interesting.
I don't like it. And you don't usually on Thanksgiving, I have this epiphany every year like an idiot. I'm like, why don't we have this, especially when it comes out good, right? It's like, why don't we have this more? We have turkey literally once a year. And that now I'm like totally okay with it, with this news. I'm a little disgusted with this whole thing. And I never heard this.
You
Where have I been?
Stick your hand up the butthole of the fucking turkey.
That's right.
To prepare it. Mm-hmm. And this is what has you staying up at night.
I understand that part.
The whole nature of eating animals is disgusting. It's just weird that certain people pick, chicken. It's like, let's slit the throat, put it upside down in a bucket, let it bleed out before we make,
Oh, dude.
The whole thing is
I've seen that. In real
but
life.
I'm charmed by your innocence of that. The cannibalism is what does it. I went to an exhibit about cannibalism, and they said people are every time if you bite your nails, you're basically eating yourself. And they went over a number of weird things we do that officially check the mark of cannibalism. And it's like, I guess humans are too. But
that's the voice of David Jaffe. Welcome back to the show, my friend. Good to see you. How are you?
I didn't mean to step on. Oh shit! What's his name down there? Oh, it's Dagan. Thank God he has a D
Just
on his
call me
hat,
D.
so I can recognize. I remember what his name is. Dagan, don't forget to wear your hat today, so you know your name. What does the D stand for? He's wearing. If you don't know, he's wearing a big hat.
It's Duke. D. I mean, it's a Duke.
Oh, it's
hat.
Duke University.
Cat, yeah. But it isn't. It's Dagan.
Anyway, though, thank you. Thanks for having me. Always good to be here, fellas. Sorry to interrupt, Dagan. I just
not at all, my friend.
Brain.
That was enough.
You're fine. This is what the whole nature of the show is about. Good to have you back on here. Thanks, I used you as an example. We had a recent blow up on sacred symbols, and I used you as an example.
I appreciated the kind words. Yes.
Yeah. Of a man who
You don't agree with it at all.
No, not on a lot of things. Not on a lot of things, no.
What is the one thing we agree on the most, you think? Like, what's the one? Well, I think it's meta, right? It's be honest, be curious,
Sure.
So that we agree on, which I think is one of the most important things. What's the thing we disagree on, you think, the most? Like, what's the one thing that keeps coming up that you're like, yeah, is it Game Pass?
Yeah, maybe something in the games industry, it's probably economics, and politically we probably have quite a few differences, although we probably have a lot of things the same too. I mean, the whole point is that I don't care. Yeah.
I think fundamentally you and I approach it from different angles, but we're both kind of like, stop being dicks to everybody.
Yeah, I'm
right?
just not. That doesn't come naturally to me. Like, I'm not a mean person. I can be, as people saw on the podcast last week, but I'm naturally not, and that doesn't come naturally to me. So I like to keep things, not so aggro with the people you disagree with.
People liked it. I mean, I don't know if you read the comments. I've gotten better at not reading my comments, but I do read other people's comments, and I read those comments, and they seem to really like that you were sticking up for your guys, and so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it was nice to see, and the guy was Dustin Furman, executive producer. Welcome to the show. I asked you, Dustin, via text. We've been talking a lot about various things, and I said to you, you must feel pretty good right now, right? Because people, interesting, because people really spoke on you in a positive way. There was an outpouring of support for you, and I thought that was very nice. So I'm surprised you don't feel good. Now, that's a very Colin answer where you're like, no, I never feel good. I don't know if that's where you're going with this or what, but yeah, take it away.
So I do feel good about the support from the audience. Obviously, of course, that's good. But overall, I more so wish that the whole thing had never happened.
Yeah.
So I feel bad about the entire situation. I think that eventually it will be.
Feel bad about.
I think it'll be good eventually. But it's like I know I don't have anything to feel bad about. I just it sucks. The whole thing sucks.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that sentiment.
That's how I feel about it. So I guess, I do feel good about the support. I've gotten so many messages. I super appreciate it. I try to respond to all of them. So I don't want it to sound like that at all. I obviously super care. Everything we do is for the audience. And so to have them show up for us means everything. But at the same time, I'm not, I don't know. I don't like shit like this, but it happens. It's unavoidable. But yeah, I'm here. Thanks for having me on Constellation. Yeah. I had a totally unrelated thought about Dagan. You're the man of the hour now, because I have two thoughts about you, what you said and you specifically.
Okay.
There was a recent tweet that someone in our Discord pointed out that Chris Raygun was dressed in the colors of Paddington Bear.
I saw that. I love that.
And right now I'm getting a Charlie Brown vibe from you. I think there might be a line.
Totally.
I think that we maybe have a thing going on here with some of our hosts, maybe.
That's pretty great.
What's that called?
The stripe, right? This is very Charlie Brownish. And does he, when he's on the pitching mound,
he wears a hat, I think.
Yeah.
Does he wear a blue hat?
It's a white hat in what I'm looking at.
It's white. Okay.
I don't know. I'm not a Charlie Brown encyclopedia, So.
You ever watch Charlie Brown? Listen, this is the season. If you fucking watch, because I did a video on it a couple years back because I was stunned. We watched Christmas special. That's depressing. And I'm not being silly. Dude. I'm not doing a bit. Charlie Brown's a depressed guy who today would probably be on some meds and weekly therapy. I don't know, but I don't mean as an adult. I mean, as a kid. I mean, it's really a sad little, nobody likes him and they make fun of everything he tries to do. It's to watch it now and go, that's a beloved classic. I'm like, this is horrible.
Yeah.
But
it's a weird model, right? Because the protagonist is rarely the butt of the joke. And he's really even though he's kind of the center character.
Even his fucking dog doesn't respect him.
No, not at all.
Fucking Snoopy, dude.
Snoopy's the ringleader, man.
Snoopy rules.
Else.
I'm looking at all these pictures. It's like he's in a white hat. It seems like in stills from the cartoon. And then there seems to be some maybe still drawn stuff from the comic in a red hat. But I see nothing in a blue hat. So I think you're relatively safe.
Yeah. And I seem to remember
costume ready if you change hats.
Sure.
That is a good. I think there was something with either the TV adaptations of the Peanuts or maybe even dating back to Sparky Schultz with the comic strip, but they tried to keep the hat neutral on purpose, not to have a specific team affiliation. And to say, have that Wonder Years dynamic where it's like, this could take place in any town, USA. We don't want to point it towards this is St. Louis or something. So that might have been intentional.
Yeah, we'll put Kevin Arnold in a Jets jacket and we'll
that's a good point.
When they play outside, there are mountains in the background, so I don't know what the fuck's going on over here, but they're clearly in California. But you have seen that
company that is doing product placement with on-set green screen stuff. So if you're watching, say, a sitcom in the South, it'll be the hat might be the logo of Georgia or Auburn or Alabama.
Interesting.
But if you're watching the same sitcom on the West Coast, it might be SC or whatever.
Oh, weird.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's really, I don't know if they've started using it all over the place, but the company is out there and you can go to the website and watch the demos and stuff. And it's not just hats, it's products. If somebody's drinking this, well, if Coke pays more money that week, this becomes a Coke.
Wow.
If Pepsi does, this becomes a Pepsi. It's really quite cool. Yeah.
Wow.
So, Dig, one other thing, though, this is very important about the chicken cannibalism. I didn't get to touch in on this. And here's the thing. You say this is a bad thing. I encourage it. I want to have like a line of chickens where they breed them, they force them to eat chicken. And then eventually you get like the ultimate, you are what you eat. Talk about bears and stuff that eat nothing but fish. They taste like fish. You get chickens or turkeys that are only cannibals. And then down the line, eventually you have like the ultimate flavor of chicken or turkey, whatever. I might be onto something with this. Is it humane?
Chicken collapsing in on itself. I think it's too much.
It really is.
Black hole.
You may have a point, though.
Yeah. I'm throwing it out there. Yeah.
A baked-in turkey. You guys are familiar with the phenomenon of the turducken, right?
Right.
If you have the duck eat the chicken and then the turkey eats that, you got it all built in already. You don't have to do the whole thing of stuffing each other.
All right.
You're a West Wing guy, right, Colin?
I am very much so. I know you are too.
So, I mean, every Thanksgiving.
That's one of the things we love.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Because it's the fantasy of wouldn't it be great if politics were like that. But every Thanksgiving, I watch those two scenes. I watch President Bartlett call the Butterball Hotline, which is one of my favorite scenes. And then when he gives Charlie the Paul Revere knife, every Thanksgiving, I just
so dope.
That's my
so dope. No, it's
tradition,
dude, I love West Wing so much. Like I'm surprised that there isn't a show like that. The last show I can really think that got deep into the weeds like that was actually the Sorkin show, The Newsroom, which was awesome. And I don't know why that show got canceled. I thought it was great, but it was on HBO probably 10 years ago, maybe now at this point.
Yeah, wonderful show.
I can't believe that. I know there's been talks of reviving the West Wing and stuff like that. And I think it would be interesting to do it again. And,
I think after House of Cards and after Trump and after so many people's eyes have been open to not how a better idea of how that political sausage is really made, that the West Wing looks so fantasy now that it's almost like Leave It to Beaver, and I still love it. But I tweeted the guy who played Toby, Richard Schiff.
Yeah, Schiff. Yeah,
and because he was talking about Hamilton back in the day, and I was just like, oh my god, a West Wing musical would be awesome, And then suddenly, what's the guy's name? The guy who plays Josh Lyman.
Oh yeah,
he tweets it. Yeah, he's like, I'll do it. Oh yeah, he was in Get Out. I mean, he's awesome.
Yeah, what's that guy's name? I can't think of it.
Bradley
Whitford. That's right. Yeah, because he plays like one of the great characters in Handmaid's Tale as well.
He's phenomenal. Dope in that. I love that dude. But anyway, West Wing is the shit, and I would love it. And you're right about Newsroom. And how Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. I don't know if you ever watched that.
Right? Yeah.
Sorkin's. But I mean, people say Sorkin stuff if you don't like what he's selling is offensive. Like they don't like, the Newsroom because it's very, I'd say left, but if you like it, it's probably not left, but it's very idealistic.
Well, it is. He's like what they would call like almost a neoconservative left at this point. Like he's not a progressive at all. You could just see it. They're Clintonian. Everyone that worked and Dee Dee, what's her name? Dee Dee Miller or whatever, the Clinton's press secretary was like a really important like consultant on the show. And
CJ
people like Lawrence from MSNBC and others that were like,
he wrote it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And he played his father, which was the coolest thing.
Right. It was pretty cool. So like, and I'm not crazy about some of these guys, but yeah, they're more of like they're like a modest left at this point. And that's why I think they wouldn't survive, because they would almost have no home anymore. The Clintonians are gone.
No, they'd be like Mitt Romney now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
but West Wing's awesome. I love, and House of Cards is like fucking phenomenal. Oh my God.
It is. But did you see Olivia Munn coming? What the fuck? She was great.
Yeah, she was awesome.
Newsroom.
Yeah, she was awesome.
Like, when did she become an actual real fucking actress? Maybe
she
always was, but man, she was awesome.
Yeah, I liked how she played like the really smart economist. Yeah, that was, Anyway, we should, we'll go into Sorkin one day, maybe you and me. And
let's do a Sorkin.
Studio 60 as well. Like the fact that you even, I know you would know that, but like that's his most obscure work probably, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk today. I actually want to start. I usually bury the serious stuff at the end, but I want to start with my topic today, if I might, because I just wanted to ask you guys about something. I've been thinking about this, and people can tap out if they want. Obviously, use the timestamps if they're in the video version. I have no idea if we even do that, but skip ahead if you want. I wanted to talk about colonialism. This is through the lens of maybe broadly the Israeli-Palestinian situation right now. And we don't have to talk about that. I will say this about the Israeli-Palestinian conversation, that when people kind of have these cop-outs where they're like, man, this is a really complicated situation. It's like, I actually think the Israeli-Palestinian situation is maybe the single most complicated situation in the entire world. Like that's how seemingly complex it is, with the consequences that can kick off World War III with very clear delineations between societies and everything. And it's very scary. And I think that talking about it is fun and interesting and obviously necessary, but it gets people so riled up. So we don't need to focus on that, although we can get there if you want. But I wanted to talk about the idea of colonialism, and I emailed you guys my idea here, and just reading so many things where I find there's this contradiction at the center of colonialism. And I wanted to know if you guys think about it, what it means for you, if anything, which is that I think we all agree that it's bad, right? Like strong societies going and subjugating weak societies is bad. It's natural, I guess. It happened for a big time immemorial. But until, the reason, for instance, that the Russia-Ukraine situation, I think, bums people out so much is because it's a modern version of what has happened forever. But we're actually just seeing it and paying attention to it in a blow-by-blow, day-by-day thing where it's like the Anschluss in Nazi Germany in the 1930s when they just started taking land, and that really scared people, but only to a degree because it wasn't shoved down your throat everywhere you looked or whatever, so you could only be so worried about it. And so I think that that's what's so interesting about the Russia situation, and people are just kind of seeing it for what it is in some sense, and obviously Israel and Palestine and all of that. But here in the United States, we obviously have a history of colonialism and not really subjugating another group of people as much as just pushing them out and wiping them out.
Speaking of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, speaking of Thanksgiving. Not so much in violence. I mean, violence happened. Lots of violence happened. But unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at the situation, I guess, or whatever, just neutrally, is that most people died just from disease and being pushed off their land and stuff like that. Not just, but that's the way they died. It wasn't necessarily done in violence. It was done in selfishness. Some of it was done in violence. It's also true that when the conquistadors, for instance, came to South America and Central America, they encountered a fucking blood cult. And we're dealing with some pretty hairy shit that way too. So it wasn't like everyone was living this righteous life here in North and South America. That's certainly not true. What was installed in South America ultimately today is a lot better than what they found. And I guess that's what I wanted to bring up today, is this very interesting tension. And I was curious if you guys thought about it or what you think about it. Talk about it with me. We know the way we got here was wrong, right? In some way. Conquest, it's a thing that happens. But we know the strong subjugating the weak is just so fucking, I don't know. It's like a Viking mentality or something like that. But here we are. None of us do anything about it. People speak about the sadness of living on indigenous lands, but they never give their land back. It reminds me a lot of when people talk about hiring practices at companies. We need more, a white man says, like, we need more black women. And it's like, well, why don't you just quit? You don't believe it that much. It's easy to say, but you don't believe it enough to put yourself out. So you don't really believe it that much at all. And I guess I'm wondering if you guys deal with this conundrum too. It's something I've always been kind of cognizant of, especially growing up on Long Island. We all live in places where Indians were, obviously. But on Long Island, it's really shoved down your throat because half the towns are named after after Indian tribes. So you're just constantly with Patchogue and Ronkonkoma and so on and so forth. It's in our faces. And I don't know how to feel about it. And I guess it comes to light today with Israel and Palestine, because it's interesting. If it's what's most important is, and Barry Weiss made this point on a podcast, which I thought was interesting. If what's most important about land is who was there first, then the Israelis were there first. The Old Testament was literally written in that land. But is that what's really important? Was it who was there more recently? Was it who was there for the longest period of time? Was it who was there and was able to defend it the longest period of time, or brought the most to the land, or whatever? I don't know. I don't know how any of this works. And we walk around just accepting the status quo, even though we like to talk about it. And we like to do that. Microsoft does this at some of their conferences and stuff, where they do land like acknowledgements. And I saw someone write about it, where it's like, it literally sounds like a conquering society naming all of the enemies that they just vanquished. It's like, here are all, you used to live here, A, B, C, and D. And we wanted to acknowledge that. It's like, who does that? That's so strange. It's like, that's the best you can do. So I guess I've gone on long enough. Jaffe, I want to hear, do you ever think about this tension?
Well, I do want to add, though, that Microsoft does a little bit more. Everybody who did used to live there gets free Game Pass for a year. So it's important to understand that it's not just the acknowledgement. But yeah, I mean, I think about it in two ways, but I think what you're saying is absolutely right, which is, we, I believe, are we're kind of being asked to sort of have our foot in two different almost realities, right? One of them is our practical day-to-day reality that we've built our lives around, and the other is kind of a 30,000 foot view of humanity. And I think at a humanity level, when you say everybody agrees colonization is bad, I don't know if that's true. Like, I think if you strip out the humanity of it, which I know is impossible, but I think if you strip out sort of the human element and you look at it as almost like animals or bacteria, or, really at a very high level, it is kind of like what you're saying. I forget what his name was. He was a Nobel laureate poet in the 60s, I think, who actually talked about colonialism and said that, if you look at what has happened to these places that have been colonized, health is better, economy is better, people's safety is, there are advantages, and so I think you can kind of almost look at it medically, like, oh, when this gets infused into this area that isn't as strong, it strengthens that area. But there's obviously so much other shit marbled in with that, because it's not that clean. The Europeans came over and changed South America, North America, but they also brought their crazy religion. I know, whatever. I see the comments now. I'm not going to get into religion. People hate me on this channel sometimes. They're like, oh, he talks about, but I'm just saying that everything comes with a consequence. Everything comes with, if the Europeans were the robots from AI at the end of AI, the Spielberg film, and they were just perfect, then sure. But that's, you start getting into that. You start getting into the fact that we don't pay for the benefits of colonization, really, in the sense that we advance a society that we've invaded, but we still are invading and killing and treating the people like shit. Right. So, I mean, I think it's one of those things where I don't think we're smart enough. Like, we have these two parts of our brains that are fighting, right? We've got the evolving part, the higher level, the higher thought part. And then we've got the kind of dominate, I want to fight and win part. And every human has a different set of where they're balanced on that. And I think until we all get closer to the same, it's hard to know how to feel about this, because we benefit from it and we also know it's wrong. And so do I think about it? Yeah. Do I think about it as it relates to Palestine and Israel? Yeah. I think most people, when you say how far back do you go, like if you say originally it was the Jews, and it was, but it's 2023, and end of the day, I mean, let's put it this way. This is terrible to say. This is fucking terrible to say, but I'm going to say it now. I think what Hamas did to the Jews on the 7th or the 6th was just whatever, horrid. I think going after Hamas in Gaza is horrid, but I know that it's not intentional to hurt civilians, and they're trying to keep from doing it. But let's just say for a moment, it's a terrible thing to say, because I would love for Palestine to have their own state, the Jews to have their own state. Wonderful. But just for a moment, if Israel just said, fuck it, I mean, it would start World War III. But if Gaza was flattened, if it, I mean, some of these, like Lindsey Graham is like, just flatten it. Okay, I'm not really suggesting that. But it isn't that dissimilar to what you're saying, right? It's like in 100 years, if somebody just got in there and just fucking said, you know what, we'll take you all out. Not just Gaza, but all of it. All of the things that don't vibe with Western thought. In 100 years, we'd probably go, yeah, that was good. It was awful, but it was good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I would pull the trigger, but so many things, like even the fucking bombs we dropped on Hiroshima. Of course it was awful, but it helped in the war. It was a big part, if not the biggest part in ending the war. How many more people would have died?
Right.
So I think if you enter it with this sense of the only solve are solutions that are morally clean, I don't know if you're going to survive very long, is what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You said a lot there. Yeah, because
I did say a lot there.
No,
made sense. And by the way, I didn't mean to insult religion. I do really. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that for me, I don't like religion, and so when they brought it over, that to me is one of the bad things. But I respect the fact people dig their religion. I'm not trying to be a dick.
No, I understand that. And to what I said earlier, I mean, for the other side is that the Aztec fucking blood cult that they had going on was religion, So and the mass just violence, and
I would say I would take Christianity over pulling somebody's heart out and using their head as a soccer ball.
Exactly right. But that's exactly right. And this is where I get into like this. I speak to. I mean, I think this is obvious. Civilizations and cultures are not equal. I believe that individual people are born equal into societies that then mold them, and that they either contribute to or suffer from, but that we're all kind of naturally the same. But so I speak from, and that's probably something you and I agree on, Jaffe, but I think that civilizations are like, I think a Western American centric civilization is clearly superior in virtually every way to an autocratic, Arab country, just random country with totalitarian dynastic shit going on and fucking Sharia law and all that. Doesn't mean that they don't have the right to do that.
Right.
That's their land. But our culture is clearly a superior culture. Doesn't make me the superior person to someone that lives there, though.
China's hard to talk about, though, with that theory, because China in so many ways is so great, but the only way they can be so great is to be so awful. Like, they aren't limited with science and medicine and tech, because you've got people saying, you're playing God. They'll do the fucking face transplants and they'll do all the weird shit that might be not wonderful, but will eventually lead to something. Or they will go, look, if you fucking make our country ugly, we'll put you in fucking jail. Like, there is a sense of that dictatorship being the ability to sort of say, look, humanity in China, we're going to guide you a little bit more than they do in America. Because they're, and I'm not saying I would want that, but I could see in 1,000 years, 100 years, if China does end up kind of becoming the only superpower and really infusing their views all over the world, I could see us looking at it and going, that was pretty good. We would have never had, interstellar travel. We would have never had the cure for cancer, whatever, if it wasn't for a government stepping in and saying, we're just going to kind of fucking do it. So I'll shut up. But I mean, I agree with you on the Middle East, but and like Saudi Arabia and stuff, and I certainly would rather live in America than China. I think China is awful. But I think if we're talking about it at a high meta level of like sort of what affects cultures and societies, I think there is a valid argument that progress, technological progress, medical progress, safety progress they're probably going to get there faster and farther than we are when we have to deal with a bunch of, blowback that comes with having a republic. But I'd still rather take the republic, but that may just because that's what I'm used to.
Well, I'd rather take it just because I don't think the ends always justify the means. I mean, take that to the extreme of like Nazi science, right? They would do like crazy experiments like on twins, right?
Oh yeah, it was horrible.
And like do like see if one can feel the other and cut one's arm off and put it on the other one and do. It's like, I guess you could learn something from that. I don't know, but that's insane. I mean, that's like the ends just simply. So to me, I'd rather just be more bioethical, right? And it's funny you bring up China because Micah and I just last night watched a Vice episode about what they call the 996 in China, which is they work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week.
Oh God!
And like
everything I said, take it back.
And this culture of how that is kind of the way that the government subjects control over people, because you don't have to do that, but the rat race is really big in China, and you do start making more money and having a more affluent lifestyle, and they start taking advantage of you that way. Anyway, Dave, let's get you involved in this conversation. I'm curious, does this tension of, it's like, I don't know what I expect. I don't expect anything. I'm a student of history. I know how it all went down. I do pretty well. But you would like maybe more of like a passive colonialism where it's like you learn from us and we teach you. It's like there's no doubt like the Native Americans didn't have the wheel. For the most part, they didn't have written language. They didn't leave behind anything really of massive consequence. So it's not like they had this amazing civilization that we took out or whatever. I'm not saying that. I know people will attack me for that, being like, what are you talking about? You found them and they lived the same way for 10,000 years. Like nothing was even happening here, you know? And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't mean that what happened to them wasn't wrong. I mean, this is just, but then you come to me, it's like, all right, I live in Virginia. This was clearly Indian land here. It's like, I'm not giving it up. Here I am, you know? And so it's what Jaffe was saying about, we obviously all reap the benefits in the long term, but I don't know. I struggle with that midterm where we kind of just, it's not that we got away with it. We all know it, but then we're just allowed to live that contradictory life and almost self-congratulate ourselves by just acknowledging it, but we don't make any changes. And what can you even do at this point anyway, but admit that it happened and move on, I guess? I don't know. We would just be, and I don't mean this through the Israeli-Palestinian lens at all. I just mean generally, like what would we do if people came and took our land? It might happen one day. I mean, I don't think the United States is permanent. So what do you think about this tension?
I mean, you know what I think the most fascinating part of this for me is just how it's transpired, like the genesis over this entire thing over my lifetime, as I've known it since I've been alive, since 49 years old. So let me think about this. So 79 or 80 was my kindergarten year of grade school, and then I graduated in 92. So I went to school in the 80s. That's when I got my public school education. And I just think about from its inception as a 5-year-old and throughout most of my schooling, maybe short of high school, this whole thing, at least insofar as learning about where we're from, these United States of America, it was a very appropriate for all ages, G-rated presentation of what actually happened. Obviously, right? Like they definitely stopped short in elementary school of teaching about the murder and the genocide and the slash and burn and the displacement of an entire peoples and the hoarding of resources. Like it was a very kind of positive presentation of it, right? Trade and exchange of cultures. They taught the Native Americans, or we called them Indians then. The Indians taught us A, we taught them B. We sat down and we ate pumpkin pie and turkey together. We dressed as pilgrims and Indians. Like this is what we were taught. And it wasn't until late in my adolescence or maybe early in my teens where I started to learn, or we collectively as kids started to learn, that there was a lot more to this story. And so there was a delay or a vetting for a proper education in this, which really boils down to colonialism, right? And sort of, I hate to say it, but an unlearning of what we already knew. Like I think back to growing up then, and I know it was the same, if not worse, in previous decades, what they were taught in the 70s or the 60s or the 50s or prior to that. But there's something about, would it have been better to learn about what this actually was when they thought we were ready for it? Like learn about the origins or the foundations of where you're from when you get old enough. Let's say it starts in 7th grade, right? So there, I think, especially for my generation and maybe people older as well, there is some sort of, it's hard to not have some sort of sorrow or regret or some feeling of making amends or how can we fix this or adjust it. I guess it's just compassion, right? Because I think there's that delay because we learned it. We learned it wrong or maybe very watered down and diluted. I think about with my kids now 13 and 16, there's something, it's a little more complicated than just A versus B because they go to they're in a much better school district. I think they're much better educated than I was. And I think there's also been an evolution of public school education in this country, but I know they were sensitive or they had a grasp of the actual facts much early on. Now, this ties in with just the readiness of information now and the internet. It's not just school with them, but I know they know a lot more about, the founding of this country than I knew at their ages, which is kind of a fascinating thing. And, when we were growing up, it was this they came over in the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. And, it was very, and look at the pilgrim hat, how charming that is. And here's, we're wearing the Indian brave and the warrior and growing corn. And we taught them about, they taught us about working the land and we taught them their alphabet, like whatever it was, like not taking into account the big picture. And that's what's kind of fascinating for me. And when I go back down and I think about now the idea of colonialism and how it dates back hundreds and thousands of years, and this involves empires and the Greeks and the Romans and eventually England and how we spawned from that. But this is kind of the same story, just every few hundred years, kind of recultivated and rebranded. And it's interesting because I even think back to my very earliest childhood memories. And also, I guess, just being a fan of the 70s, right? You think of somebody like who was an early adopter in the public eye of the Native American plight, for instance, right? Like Marlon Brando in the 70s. Right?
Oh, yeah. He got laid into.
He was a pariah. I mean, he was really a pariah. It was like, all right, he's one of our greatest actors, but if we're going to have him at the Oscars and he's going to give his acceptance speech, or if he's going to be on Carson or Cavett, we're going to have to deal with his hijinks. He's going to come on in the Native American garb. He's going to have Native Americans in tow. He's going to talk about his movie for 2 minutes, and he's going to talk about the plight of the Native Americans for 25 minutes, and we're just going to have to deal with it.
And he's going to send a Native American to get his Oscar.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a whole controversy about her too, right? That she was full of shit ultimately and everything. She died recently.
That was a whole fake thing. And that was,
Yeah.
She was only half Native, whatever it was. But,
I don't even know.
The public consensus was this is a pain in the ass. We don't want to think about it. And that how it's evolved over my lifetime to be like, no, this is something we really need to sort of deal with. You know what I mean? We need to kind of dig down into the facts, and it's not a thing. I know it's complex because it's this generational thing, and we really are a melting pot here. So who's from where and whose legacy dates back to, England and Ireland and Italy and who's Spanish. So we don't really have anything to do with this. This is not part of my lineage. It's part of your lineage and the blame game and everything. But what I really at the core of this, what I'm fascinated about is just how the sentiment has largely changed. And what I knew of this growing up, which was next to nothing, to now going on 50 years old and it being such a completely different story. And it seems like generally we're in this completely different mindset now. That's really the fascinating part of it. And I think, but sometimes when I feel shitty, like, I think it is, Colin made a good point too. It's extra ironic that we grew up in this Native American, this place that was so rich with Native American history.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's really down to the whole Northeast, but especially Long Island. So that
Alabama as well. I mean, Alabama.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, certainly, I would imagine so. Yeah. Because the down in the Gulf Coast is where the North American Indians first encountered the white man. So they were the ones that were, and you probably know more about this than I do, Jaffe. Isn't there there were like rumors of basically like white Indian tribes, right? Because there was like a bunch of intermingling and intermarrying in the Southeast, and there would be like these legacies of like white Indian kids and stuff like that.
I've never
I don't know if you know anything
that.
about that. Yeah, you should look into it. It's interesting. That all happened in the Southeast. But Dustin, let's get you involved. I'm curious. You're in Western Pennsylvania, the land of the Shawnee and the Erie, the Susquehannock, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think about this question, this tension that exists that I think is so interesting for us to kind of confront? Although, is it that let me ask you this, Dustin, is it that we're the first people that at least, or the first civilization maybe that was like, we conquered a people, but we're like, shout out to them. It wasn't like when the Normans took, Anglo-Saxon England and they're like, we speak French now, like, and came in and like fucked everything up and just killed everyone. Just whatever, and just laid waste to the place. At least we were like, oh yeah, shout out to them. So maybe that's like a piece of evolution to us getting to a place where.
Well, how long did it take though? I mean, it wasn't like we did that, back when Columbus.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying is like, to the point of that is that like maybe we could look at it as a positive, as like one step in the right direction of saying like, well, at least we're acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Like you got to acknowledge the problem. I don't know, Dustin. This is a complicated issue. I'm curious if you have anything to say.
Yeah. I was trying to think, what does he say on Sopranos? He's like, and in this house, Christopher Columbus is a hero.
Yeah.
When there's that big fight. That's
right.
Immediately what I thought of. But yeah, obviously this is really complicated and has changed rapidly over the past, 10, 20 years, particularly even when I was in high school hearing about what Dagan said. I can definitely relate to some of that where you find out more of the story later. I think in terms of where things are now, I see it as kind of the problem across the board with a lot of issues like this is that I am cool with correction and acknowledgement to some degree, but I almost feel like there's an over correction, right? I think about, this idea that we see pop up, particularly the number one example I thought of was this past 4th of July when Ben and Jerry's, the ice cream company, put out that big thing about, they're like, we need to return stolen land. Let's start with Mount Rushmore, right? And they made this big stink on 4th of July about it, only to be revealed that their HQ is on Native American land. So this is what Colin was saying, where it's like, okay, well, why don't you start? Lead by example. Do it. But no. It has to be somewhere else, right? And so that's where the thing is for me, is that I think that what happened was wrong. We can all agree on that. And I think that it is good and important that we change the education to be true, to be what actually happened. And so people understand that. But at the same time, where that overcorrection comes in is like, are we going to acknowledge, like you said with Microsoft, the acknowledgement aspect, or, giving land back or reappropriation, stuff like that. It's like, I am just not, in terms of almost anything, this idea of the sins of the father are unto the son. I'm not down with that. I don't know anyone from hundreds of years ago that committed these things. And we as a society, while we're still pretty fucked up in a lot of ways, there's one area where I think we've gotten at least a little bit better. And so I'm okay with the acknowledgement that's like, yeah, our history, there's some fucked up shit that happened. And as a result of that, we're now here. So what do we do with this now? This information, other than tell the truth, acknowledge that it's like, yeah, what happened was wrong. People died in heinous ways. And that's not who we want to be anymore. And that's it.
Yeah.
But isn't that, I mean, I agree to some extent, but I don't think for white guys born in America should be should have the biggest seat at the table of making those decisions about, isn't it time we said enough is enough? This is crazy. I hear that argument and I get it, but I don't have to suffer whatever slings and arrows a Native American has because of the sins of the fathers, or an African American has because of the sins of the fathers. And it doesn't mean that we do everything and we give back land and we pay restitution or reparations for slavery. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But it does mean that I don't think we're the ones, or people like us should be the ones to be driving those decisions fully, because of course we're going to feel that way because it doesn't affect us.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dustin.
No, I was going to say that makes sense to me. I just don't know. Like, I don't know. It's one. Okay, so what are we supposed to do? Like, realistically, what is to be done?
Right. This is the tension. Right. This is
what
I was talking about.
I would like to tell you what I think. First, I mean, I think what you're saying is it's just part of humanity at the moment that we do this. Because really, how far back do you want to go? Are you saying that, where the first million humans were born, they should never leave 5 miles from where they were born? I mean, they should, where does it, where do you, we're going to travel.
All right. We had a technical issue there. I have no idea who was going at that point.
I was saying something.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, please. No, if you remember what you were saying, continue.
I really don't. I think.
Oh, the question was, what do we do? What do we do now?
Right.
And you were in the process of responding to that. Yeah.
Well, right. You can't stay where you were born. You can't be like, okay, you're going to live within 5 miles of where the first 2 million people got born. So it's going to happen. Right. I think and I don't have this analogy right yet, but there's something that seems correct to say about there's a colonialization happening via technology. And it relates to kind of what Dagan is saying about his kids and education and all that, because my kids were the same. Because of the internet, because of social media, because of all this stuff, their awareness of reality just runs straight up against what a lot of these schools are trying to go back to. Like if you look, I think Virginia is one state where they're doing it, where, you've got very conservative school boards who are saying, let's change and remove things from the history books and things like that. And they're like going, whether you're a kid in Virginia or a kid somewhere across the world or in a, progressive state like California, you're going, that's not really what happened. And so I think in some ways, this idea of technology kind of invading all of our lives has created this disruption that before, like Colin was saying, with Nazi Germany, you didn't see it every 5 seconds. And so it was harder to understand maybe what was going on compared to Russia, Ukraine, whereas now it's all out there.
Right.
And we are struggling, I think, as humanity to figure out how to adjust to the truth. Because if you look back, the history of people, the information being held and controlled by the powers that be allowed them to craft a narrative that motivated us to act in a way that advanced civilization. And now, it doesn't mean it was always good, of course, but now that we know the truth, their tools have broken down. Our sense of black and white, no one is black and white anymore. It's all like, who the fuck knows what's going on? And I have faith that just like the bigger society will come in and improve in a lot of ways the weaker society, but there will be a lot of collateral damage, that we will be able to evolve to meet this technology and change to become better. Because I think if we could harness it and understand it and not be so like we could control it versus us controlling it or it controlling us, I think that would build a stronger society. But I think right now we're living through just this massive storm at sea of going, we weren't prepared for this. And then AI is going to, is already taking it in another direction. So I think it's ultimately going to be good because it's going to make us stronger and it's going to make us smarter and it's going to make us maybe more united, but it's going to come kind of like the Native Americans. It's like, that you had your time. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm just saying that a stronger civilization showed up. and it would not be denied. Just like these fucking tech corporations, they're not going to be denied. So we may as well learn to harness this shit.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
It's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think Dustin said it. Jaffe said it too. You mentioned a really important word, truth. I know a lot of time has passed. What's the statute of limitations? What do we do now? There's a big sense of regret. Now we have the proper education. It's very complex. But one thing you can do is just kind of swear, make an oath now to tell the truth. You know, stop the miseducation.
But what is the truth?
Of what really happened. Of what,
right.
In other words, like no more the cardboard pilgrim hats and the charming buckles on the shoes and everything. That's fine. That's cute. That is a part of the aesthetic and the way it looked. But I would just say,
yeah, dress like a Puritan.
Conveying respect, right? It's about conveying respect. There's nothing more disrespectful than changing somebody's story. Nobody wants their story.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice, even on the left, or maybe not especially, but certainly on the left, it would be nice to, for them to be open-minded about the value of nuance, right? Because I see so many people out there, it's like, when we go back to the Israeli-Palestine thing, it's like all these college kids that are just like, free Palestine and Israel's awful. And it's like, yes, Israel has done some terrible fucking things. But Hamas and a lot of people who voted Hamas in have also done worse things in the sense that they've tried to have a two-state solution and Arafat said, fuck you. And so here we are, and so I just think it would be nice if everybody could just go, guys, we don't know. You don't have all the truth. You don't have it all. Even this fucking hospital in Gaza that got leveled. At first it was the Israelis. And then it's like, no, it was actually a misfire from Hamas and everybody cooled down. And then the New York Times put out something yesterday saying, well, now we don't really know what happened. It might have been the Israelis or it might have been Hamas. We don't fucking know. And so it's like, what we need to evolve into is a people that really are just comfortable with the ambiguity of going, man, let that cook for a little bit. We don't know yet. We aren't going to have all the facts, and see where we go from there. But man, people are so quick, and I'm guilty of it too. I'm not like above it, but it's like, it's hardwired in, you become, that's my team. I'm going to fucking fight for it. It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's, you bring up like the Oslo Accords, I guess, and the two-state solution. And it's funny. That's what I always wanted too. And I know Israelis wanted that too. They wanted that since 1948 and the UN partition and all of that. And it is the Palestinian side that stops that from happening. But it's what I was saying earlier, where this issue is so complicated and so unsolvable that I literally think crazy things about it, where I'm like, and I think there was a discussion about this a long time ago. I talked to Mike about this before Israel was founded or whatever, but it's like, could the United States basically offer a right of return for Jewish people to live in the United States and just get out of there and just give the land up, right? We had another technical issue, but I'm coming back in here. I was just saying that I think that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is so complex that you have to imagine that a realistic long game solution would be to remove, not forcibly, but convince one side to be like, if you can't be here peacefully with each other, then one side has to go somewhere else, and I was wondering, would there be some sort of way to offer Israelis a part of the United States or something like that, which I think if you read about, there was something about Alaska and the Israelis or something during early Zionism, Theodore Herzl, 1880s, 1890s. I think there was some conversation about where you would go, and ultimately they wanted the right to return to where they are from, I guess, historically. But that's where my mind goes with that situation, because it is so complex. The two sides hate each other so
well. Yeah, you have to
deeply
extract, right, how much of it's just about the land, and how much of it is just they don't like the Jews, and even if they solve the land problem, are they going to suddenly, hey, let's have the Jews come over and celebrate our holidays and then we'll go over and celebrate Hanukkah, or is it still going to be, we want to drive you guys into the sea? I wouldn't know what percentage, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Of that.
I agree. To me, I think another thing I think sometimes, and again, these are like mega complicated, is like Gaza is just surrounded by Israel, right? So would you just say like, we'll take Gaza,
Egypt, right?
What'd you say?
Egypt as well,
And Egypt
right?
to the south,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And would you say something like, we'll take this and remove this Palestinian enclave and give you a piece of land that connects to the West Bank, and that could be like the Palestinian state bordering the Jordan and Israel and I guess Lebanon or whatever? And could you work something like that? It's like, it's insane. I mean, these are the things that I think about when I think about the situation, because I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. It just seems like having a country separated in two like that is going to be a very difficult thing, like where it's just cut down the middle. It's like that piece of Russia in Europe. Do you know what I'm talking about? That's like, there's like a little enclave of Russia on, I guess, what would that be? The Baltic? I don't even know, but and it's surrounded by a couple of countries, and you have to go between countries to get to it. The Baltic countries. So I think about that sometimes, where I'm like, that's such a complicated geopolitical issue too. Obviously, Taiwan and China being separated. So this just folds into that. I just think it's just mega complicated. I don't envy anyone trying to figure it out.
Well, okay, but I think it goes back to what you were saying about just colonialism. I mean, I think if you, and I know this sounds terrible, but you know, I think you have to think about it when you're having these conversations at this level. If you go at a 30,000 foot view and you remove the humanity from it, maybe it is true. The best thing, like at a colonizing situation, the best thing that could happen to that whole region is just to fucking take it over and bring either, right? I mean, I'm just saying. I mean,
well,
I don't
didn't we try
Israel,
that though with like in some way with Iraq and
I'm
Syria.
not okay. I mean, drop the fucking bombs. I don't like Lindsey Graham. I don't agree with him. I'm not really suggesting this, but I think what I am suggesting is it's one of those like what is it called, the Gordian knot, that you just fuck it. Just, you know, you're not going to solve it, right? It's cancer upon cancer upon cancer. So just fucking aim the fucking chemo at it and just cut it out. Let's just get rid of it. Because it's broken. And how long has this been going on, and how many people have suffered, and how many, you know, I know that sounds drastic, but isn't it not dissimilar to what you're talking about with colonization, which is the stronger societies come in and improve the weaker societies? And if you are basically, would you suggest that, maybe not Saudi Arabia, but would you suggest that, you know, a lot of these societies over there, I mean, it's not like you can say Egypt is a weak society or Israel, but it just seems so, they're not going to solve it, so let's fucking give it an antibiotic, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Doesn't it seem like the only solve is a big thing like that?
Well, that's why I'm saying I think this is where I think we're talking about like hard power versus soft power, and why I think that you have to employ serious soft power to change the situation, and that's probably the most humanitarian thing that you can do. I mean, the big problem in the Middle East is Iran. I mean, that's the big problem. I mean, they're the problem. They fund Hezbollah, they fund Hamas. Right. They're insane, and they are a death cult too. I mean, and a lot of that situation. And there's no doubt that, you know, to Israel's credit, it's like the only place that an Arab person in the Middle East can vote in a free and fair election is in Israel. You know, it is true that the Palestinian people did elect Hamas in the West, in Gaza. And although that was years ago, there are no real elections there anymore. And they consider it kind of an occupied territory anyway. But that's the complexities that I don't want violence. I guess that's the big thing. And we've known that since the beginning. If you read about Columbus, even when he came back, he went to the New World 4 times. When he came back after the first time, they brought a bunch of natives back with them. A lot of them died on the way, and then they like kind of dragged them to Queen Isabel, and she was like, you can't do this to these people. You know, like even they knew even then, like, you can't treat people like this and expect.
But they did.
Well, they didn't. The conquistadors later really did. I mean, I mean, not that Columbus had great interactions with the Taino and everything, but like the whole conquest thing happened after he was dead, you know? And no, they certainly didn't. And they would argue that what they found was, I guess it was the Aztecs and another tribe, like another huge tribe, in this like generational war with each other. And those people took the people that were fighting, like the blood cold Aztec people, were taking the sides of the conquistadors, and they fought together and all of that. And I'm like, these are the little excuses, though, that remove, in my opinion, the reality of the violence and all of the rest. It's very similar to when people say, like, well, Triangle's trade was really fed by slaves that were captured by other black tribes and sold to white people, and all that. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't absolve you of your major interaction with it nonetheless. And that's just
do we have any historical evidence or any historical examples of when the more humanitarian action to colonization has been successful, though?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you're saying soft power versus hard power, but, one could easily argue that for almost 100 years, we've tried soft power with, not that it's our job to solve the Middle East, but clearly we've put ourselves in there.
Yeah, so, I would think that the only examples, to be fair, would be soft power exercised after hard power. So what I would mean by that is, like, we decimated Europe and then we gave them the Marshall Plan, and that made them American aligned for generations. Same thing with Japan. I mean, Japan is in the United States back pocket. I mean, no offense.
So I'm just saying, it's like, have we ever actually done something like that?
Well, I think we're
as a people.
I think, Jaffe, to that point, I think we seem to be in the midst of it with, like you say, technology. Like, I think America has quietly, for better or for worse, exported so much through all the big technology companies in the world, for the most part, are American. There's not an accident. It's a specific quirk of our free enterprise society and the laissez-faire kind of society that lets things grow and become huge and behemoth. It's not to say that the Huawei's and shit don't exist, but generally speaking, our companies are the biggest, and that's so having simply Apple and Microsoft and all that is an exercise of active soft power that has nothing to do with hard power. But then you see other things, like I put it in the Sacred Symbols thread on iOS, where Raytheon, apparently the weapon companies we always make fun of, released these dystopian statements about the war in Israel, being like, this will be great for our bottom line, and we anticipate the DoD is going to spend, and like that's where the rubber hits the road as far as exercising hard power softly, if that makes any sense, because now our weapons manufacturers want these big conflicts to happen to enrich themselves and all of the rest, and we kind of lose. I think we just lose sense of what would make most sense, which would be, the United States can do what it wants and live the way it wants on its own territory, and we should kind of just allow, with some reservations, people to kind of do what they want to do on their own land. And the places where there are these conflicts, so Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel, we have to have some sort of, I don't know, we do have to come to some sort of decision about what happens to these, or, the countries that are involved in it have to come to some sort of decision about what happens in these places, because the tension is palpable.
It's bad. Yeah. I mean, do you guys mind if I hit you with this?
Please.
Since the flaring up of
tension, I need to know what it is.
Well, let me bounce this off you guys and see what you think, because I keep coming back to this one thing that I heard very early on, weeks ago, when tension started to flare up in a big way again. And this is still the one thing, even after looking at the news and listening to what's going on a daily basis, this is the one thing I keep coming back to. I think it was on NPR, I was on the radio, I was in the car. They were interviewing an Israeli civilian, just a woman. She wasn't a soldier, she wasn't a politician. She was saying that she lost her daughter at some point, I think last time these two factions were fighting, in some bombing. Her daughter was a civilian. She got killed by Hamas, by the Palestinians, whatever. And she was saying and I don't know if this is too simplistic or if this is even unrealistic in some way, because if you look at this, these are ancient grudges, hostilities, the idea of ownership, the idea of revenge.
Dude, the Palestinians have a name for being displaced by Israel, the NAPCA, I think they call it, which is translated as catastrophe. And it's this generational thing that's just built into them.
It's a generational thing, taught down, handed down by generation to generation, kind of soaked into their fabric. And some of these ideas of like, I lost my dad to this, the idea of revenge, very understandable from a human perspective, right? But this woman was saying, and this woman was in the epicenter of having lost somebody, having lost a child in this, right? She was saying literally the only way this is ever going to end. And I'm not even thinking she was talking specifically. I think she was talking generally. is, let's say hypothetically Hamas bombs, there's a bombing. Dozens, scores, hundreds of Israelis are killed. Israel, for instance.
We just had that.
Israel goes and says, instead of responding militaristically or with force, says, let's go to you know what, enough is enough. We're not going to respond in kind. Let's go to the table. How do we stop this? In other words, stopping that cycle of revenge, right? She was saying literally and this is like an impossible thing to even wrap your head around maybe. But she was saying that's the only way this ever ends is when one side just after something catastrophic like that happens, puts their guns down and puts their gunships down and their rockets and everything and just says, let's go. How do we stop this? And I don't think sort of gesture, an olive branch, I guess, essentially is what she was saying.
I don't think,
and I never thought about it like that before.
It's a wonderful narrative, but think about 9/11, right? We could have, we responded in a very human way to 9/11, but fundamentally, if we really wanted to stop 9/11s, we'd go, well, what are they really upset about? Why would they do that? It's not that they hate our freedom. It's a ridiculous concept, but people were upset and angry and terrified. And so, we allowed the Bush administration to make up all kinds of bullshit to go to a war with a country had nothing to do with 9/11. Ultimately, though, and like Colin is saying about the gun manufacturers, I mean, there are the powers that be kind of like the state of things. That's how they make their money, and that's how they get their power. I don't mean that like I'm some kind of conspiratorial fella, but fundamentally, if we respond the way that lady is suggesting, that would mean that Netanyahu and all of his hardliners and even Arafat, my understanding is when he said no to the two-state solution, it wasn't that he didn't want it, but he had all these fucking wealthy people pushing in on him from the anti-Israel view, and so there's all this stuff that's not really about solving the problem. I mean, I could be wrong on that, Colin. You are more of a student of history. I mean, do you think that's just a dumb talking point, or do you actually think that a lot of these folks who really are running a lot of shit aren't interested in this going away because it's how they keep their power?
Maybe. I think it depends on who you're talking about. I think that this is such a powder keg that external forces would want this thing to be solved immediately because it's like one of the obvious flashpoints of a wider war. It's like it's been since 1948, and Israel has been invaded many times. I mean, 48, 67, 73, et cetera, plus all of these different incursions. And what's kind of ironic, and I mean, it doesn't really matter because it's just a blood feud over this land, so it doesn't matter how you really square it. But the reality is that if the Palestinians accepted the 1948 partition, they would have had the maximal amount of land. That every time Israel was attacked, they just took more land. And like the Golan Heights and all of this kind of stuff to say, like, we need this to protect ourselves. This is where the mortar fire was coming from in the 1967 war, and this is where they were staging, tank convoys in 1973. And it's they had a huge piece of Egypt for a while that they gave back. So. And this is why I didn't want to get bogged down with this particular conflict, because although I understand why we are, because it's obviously through the lens that a lot of people are seeing this question right now, as I said at the top. But I think a lot of it has to do with, so externally, I think everyone wants it solved. I think internally, I think a lot of it is, I think that anti-Semitism is deeply ingrained in the Middle East in many Muslim societies. I think that certain countries like Iran and Lebanon have actively for generations, and Egypt until they normalized with them, had actively tried to stoke those fires. Remember, they were invaded by like 5 different countries at once at one time. And I think that the feud goes so deep that, and this is what I was saying earlier, that I actually do not think it's solvable unless one side completely subjugates the other, which I don't want to happen, because that is just incredible, barbaric, Bronze Age violence, basically. Or one side simply agrees to walk away. And honestly, I think the easiest thing would be the two-state solution, but short of that, if that wouldn't be possible, is that maybe Arab countries need to open their doors to Palestinian refugees by the several million, if that's going to solve the problem. But I think we all agree that like the two-state solution, the Oslo Accords and all of that were, and like that, and really the 1948, it was like one of the first things the UN ever did, based on Palestine, British mandate and just this intention after World War I to make a Zionist Israeli state that after World War II was precipitated. Remember, it was all hypothetical before the Holocaust. Theodor Herzl was just this fringe dude. People started going to Zion, to Israel, and buy land, and that was the entire idea. But they didn't declare a state until after they were basically giving carte blanche after what happened during the Holocaust. So, and a lot of this, you can really go back and blame the Europeans and their treatment of the Jews. If you really, really, really want to go back like far enough to where the Jews felt like they needed to return to Israel, is the pogroms and all of that kind of stuff. And the way the Soviet, or not even the Soviets, it was really the Russian Empire at that time, and a lot of their treatment in Eastern Europe and Poland. And this is why it's just, I don't know. I don't, and it's that, dude, I couldn't even imagine, and I'm not involved in that. Like, that has nothing to do with me. I say that over and over again. I just look at the colonial subject and question through our lens, and I find it so fascinating because I think that we live with this tension every day and we don't really know what to do with it. And it speaks to my anti-war, anti-violent tendencies to say like, well, what happened obviously isn't right, but I'm certainly not going to give up the gains that we got either. So maybe I'm just as much I'm a hypocrite, although I'd never say otherwise. I'm thankful that what happened ultimately, although I wish it went a different way. I wish that we were smart enough during the mercantile fucking age of discovery to exercise soft power, but that didn't really exist. The idea of that didn't exist.
But even now, the last thing I'll say on it, I don't want to keep, because I don't have to solve either, but when you're talking about soft power and you're talking about technology and the American companies, the interesting, horrible, ironic part about that is that, this week we found out that Jon Stewart, right, with his Apple show, who is this kind of one of the few, he's a hero of the left. I don't know what the center and right think about him, but he's a good dude in my mind. And he's a guy who likes to speak truth to power. That Apple said, well, you've got this episode coming up of, I think it's called the Problem with Jon Stewart on Apple Plus. They're like, well, you can't do that episode about China, because we make a lot of our products in China and it will be bad for our business. And Jon Stewart's like, fuck you, I'm going to do it. And they said, you can't. And he says, okay, fuck it, the show's done. And he walked away from the show. So in some ways, when we talk about soft power and American technology, what we're really talking about is soft power via American technology that's in the back pocket of China, which is kind of crazy. That, it kind of goes back to that. Who the fuck do you believe? Who do you trust? Apple goes out and spends all this money on how progressive they are and how, artistic they are. And, the crazy ones change the world. It's like, yeah, the crazy ones, I thought you meant Einstein, but you actually mean like President Xi or whatever the fuck his name is. That's the worrying part to me, but that's all I'll say. I don't know anything.
Yeah, I guess we can.
The minute I get into it, the minute I realize I'm way above or below my pay, above my pay grade. I don't know. I don't know how to solve it.
No, I don't either. And but I do want to say this. I wanted to leave with this, and we can speak on it anymore if anyone wants to. I know we're running long because of the tech issues, so I want to move on to the next topic. I apologize. That's my bad, baby. No, it's all good. But I think there's this feeling out there, and I get it, because I'm in a kind of an interesting situation where I'm my own boss, and my audience understands me, and nothing's going to happen to me, or knock on wood. But it's like, I think it's important for people to continue to speak on things, even if they don't have a full grasp on them or are trying to kind of formulate how they feel about things. I think there's too much. On one hand, there's not enough timidity, and people are too comfortable endorsing the tactics of terrorism and all of that kind of stuff, which I think, and anti-colonialism. And this is what anti-colonialism looks like. You sound like a fucking idiot when you say shit like that. Obviously, you should check yourself. As you say that at wonderful Western universities, it's hysterical. You sound like a fucking dumbass. So there's extremism. And obviously on the other end, there are people that think that they understand all of the answers and are very gung-ho about war with Iran and war with Palestine and indiscriminate slaughter of people and denying kind of the political and economic realities of people, especially in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, which are really dire. And like, that's also wrong. But I feel like people need to be able to openly express and talk about these issues without people blowing a gasket. Otherwise, there will never be a reasonable solution, no matter how it's employed. I think people
How
are
do
just
you propose because they blow a gasket because they're designed to blow a gasket because social media, we've talked about this. They go for the clicks, they go for the anger. We are being conditioned by these algorithms that make these people a lot of money to blow gaskets, to argue, to fight, to be. How do you suggest we affect change where people can just not respond so lizard brainy to that? Because wouldn't you agree that that's one of the main reasons right now that we are having people blowing gaskets and doing things going off half baked?
Yes, I think it's partially that. I think a lot of people like to signal their virtue in some different ways too, and make sure they're seen as being on the right side. But I actually think the greatest agent of change in that respect, Jaffe, is just showing that these kind of conversations can happen. I mean, one just did. And certainly they're not exclusive to this. I've listened to so many over the last few weeks, so many amazing conversations between disparate voices. There was an awesome episode of Trigonometry. I don't know if people listen to that podcast. It's awesome, out of Britain, with Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris debating the situation and how complex it is, and Zionism and Islam and reformation of Islam and all these different things. These things are tough, but I'm not afraid of talking about any of those topics. And I think the people that recoil at serious topics, especially when they don't like things that they don't hear or feel like they know more than someone, it's okay. Yeah, you don't have to get crazy about it. Dude, we on Sacred Symbols, after everything, when Hamas did what they did on Sacred Symbols, we spoke about it very briefly, but I said something like, I don't really want to speak about it too deeply on this show because I recognize I have a serious bias towards Israel based on growing up on Long Island. As Dagan and I said, you will, outside of Israel, you will not get a more Jewish experience than in the tri-state area in New York. And I grew up with a level of bias, knowing people that, and going to college too with Israelis and stuff like that. I don't know. I just have a level of bias towards their experience and knowing them. And I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to get involved in commentary on our video game podcast about it, other than that I hope the violence stops and everyone kind of comes to their right mind. But I think in venues like this, where you can speak more deeply, I think it's important to do so just to prove that it can be done without people blowing a gasket, so that when they instinctually do go lizard brain, maybe instead they'll think twice about it. It's not to say they're right or they're wrong about the way they feel. I just don't think people need to react so much. I look at our exit surveys on Patreon. People leave for all sorts of reasons. And we had one person saying Colin couldn't help but show his support for Israel. And I'm like, dude, if that's how sensitive you are to that conversation, you don't belong here in the first place. You're not going to survive here. So I think it's important to just show that, and hopefully people see it for what it is. But that's where I'll leave it. Anyone else want to say anything on this topic before we move on? It's a very complicated one. Dustin, you good?
I'm good.
Then let's go to you next for this topic, Dustin. Let's get you involved.
I did have something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jaffe. Good.
It was minor. I'm just trying to remember it. Now I just lost my train of thought, so maybe it wasn't that important. Israel, Palestine, the internet. Oh, I know what it was. We've talked in the past, just real briefly, this is only tangentially related, but I think it's important, about, what news sources to trust. I was watching a YouTube video on a channel called Second Thought. He's a very socialist guy, blah, blah, blah. But at the end, he did an ad for a site called Grounded News. Have you seen this?
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it. No.
It's really, really cool, because what has really opened my eyes is, I mean, they basically take tons of news sources and aggregate them, but then they also use a number of different outside services that help determine this is more left, this is more right, this is more centered, this is who owns the paper that is reporting on this, and so you might want to be aware, blah, blah, blah. But they have this one thing called the blind spot. And every day they'll take, anywhere from 10 to 20 articles and say, this is the percentage of right-wing reporting on this story, and this is the percentage of left-wing. And that has been so eye-opening to see how manipulated the news is on both sides, not in terms of the reporting, but in terms of what they choose to report. Like, if you look at a lot of the right stuff, it's all the pro-Israeli stuff. And if any of these, sympathy for Hamas, not Hamas, but Palestinians or whatever, that's mostly reported on the left. And it's not just about this topic. It's everything. It's shootings and movies and whatever. It has been very eye-opening to me, because even though I do lean hardcore left and hardcore progressive, the fact that I'm going, Jesus Christ, these news sources that I've depended on are not reporting badly on what they choose to report on necessarily, but by simply the absence of some of these stories, it really has affected my view of reality. And that's a shit show, So I want to give a shout out to that service, because I've been looking for something like that. I know you and I, Colin, have talked about, how do we know who to trust? And so if you're a searcher for that shit like me, I recommend it.
Yeah, it's ground.news. I looked it up.
Ground.news.
Yeah. And it's only $30 a year, which is great. You got to pay. You got to get what you get what you pay for. I think in some ways, I think people balk at that too, but I get that. There's so many different subscriptions and things. I don't know. I started blocking people on Twitter just because I'm so annoyed that they pop up on my For You feed. They're just so annoying. Where I'm like, you haven't done anything to me personally. I just can't stand seeing you here anymore because I know you're.
I took your advice for muting. I don't block them. I mute them now.
Yeah, muting is good. I hate some of them so badly that I want them to know.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
You can torture them, Colin. That's the thing that I realize. You mute someone, they don't know. So they just keep screaming at you into the void.
Oh, yeah. These people don't say anything to me.
Oh, okay.
These people are just, they're not, I should be clear. It's just people that pop up in the For You section, like algorithmically. And I'm like, you are so deeply annoying to me. And to like, that I have to go a step further. Anyway, Dustin, we haven't heard from you very much on this episode, so I want to get you involved next. What is your topic this week?
My topic is particularly both in the time frame of when we're recording this episode and because our boy David Jaffe is here. I wanted to talk about horror, or as Colin and Dagan will say, horror movies, and how they fit into our lives. So I'm kind of in the middle on this, in that I do like a decent amount of horror movies, but at the same time, I feel like I really gotta pick and choose. And it's kind of it's bold. I'm gonna make this comparison here, but it kind of reminds me of anime, where there is so much pumped out and a lot of it is trash, but there is some really good stuff in there as well. And when you really go and you search and you find those diamonds in there, there can be some awesome stuff. Horror is an interesting genre to me because you are choosing to feel uncomfortable for the sake of entertainment, right? And that's kind of just an interest. I mean, that's kind of like with anything scary, whether it's like a haunted house or something like that. You're choosing to feel the thrill, the adrenaline of the moment, or feel uncomfortable or whatever. And I've always been somewhere and when I was younger, I was a total wimp. I didn't like any kind of scary stuff at all. It scared me. It'd make me cry. Didn't want to sleep at night, stuff like that. And eventually I just kind of got over that. But I've always found it interesting, the people that are also totally immune to scary movies, where they're like, well, it's not real. I'm like, I know it's not fucking real. But in the moment when you're watching something, if you are successfully immersed, your brain is going to turn something on that it has that horror scary feeling. Even though it's like, yeah, I know I'm in my living room, in my PJs with, a Diet Coke in my hand. Of course, I know it's not real, but I still feel that intensity in the moment when you're watching something like that. The other thing that I just wanted to say specifically about horror movies in general is just that I found there's like a very particular type of horror movie that I really like, or not even necessarily sometimes in that genre, but a type of scariness that I prefer. Some people, and I think a lot of modern movies, are all about the jump scare. And it's gotten to the point where it's become ritualistic in some of these movies, where it's like, okay, they're building up to it, and then it doesn't happen. And then they punch you in the gut with it when you're supposed to be relieved, right? There's kind of like this song and dance, which for me, when it comes to a lot of these modern movies, I'm like, I don't care. I'm not in it for the jump scare. Sure. No, everyone likes like, oh, freak out for a second. For me, the movies that scare me the most are the extended horror, the extended uncomfortable feeling. My favorite movie of that is this example is The Shining, which is just a very, very long buildup. And even, I don't know if there's any particular jump scare. There are moments of intensity, of course, in that movie, but the way Stanley Kubrick crafted that movie to just continue to layer on tension upon tension and more tension. So awesome. And of course, there's a million insane theories about that movie. There's a documentary. I think, Colin, you and I have talked about this. There's a documentary called Room 237 where people are like, well, Stanley Kubrick put the picture in the background of the man skiing and the shadow looks like a fawn. And that's an allusion to it's like, shut the fuck up. None of that. But there is clearly some stuff where he intentionally made parts of the hotel not make sense to the viewer, where it sort of exists outside of what physical reality. There's a window in a room where there shouldn't physically be a window. It's not something you pick up on in your conscious mind when you're watching it, but it adds to this layer of uncertainty and this eerie feeling. The other movie I wanted to list as an example of one of the movies that has scared me more than anything, I don't even know if people would put in this genre, and that's a movie called Annihilation. I know I've told Colin about this movie, but
great fucking movie. Yeah.
I love this movie. And for the basic synopsis is that a meteor hits Earth and this like bubbling aura starts to form around it. That's called Area X. And it's about this group of scientists, it's kind of neat. All female scientists go in and see what's inside Area X. It's about what happens there. And so clearly this thing is not from this planet, and particularly, no spoilers, there are scenes at the end of this movie where I felt like I couldn't move. This idea of the existential that is out there. Who knows? That's my favorite type. H.P. Lovecraft. That's why I love Bloodborne, stuff like that. So I'll throw this over to you guys now, where, how are we feeling about, I guess, favorite horror movies and how they make you feel, what you look for, or just anything, any way you want to go. So I'm trying to figure out what the order. I mean, Jaffe, I know I slightly
got tons to
picked
say.
this
I'll
topic
shut
for
up,
you.
and I talked a lot about the
Okay.
other. So yeah, you guys go.
We'll save
and
the
if you
best for
wanna hear-
last.
I don't know about that, but yeah.
Colin, where are you at with these scary movies? Do you feel scared when you watch them, or are you just like, it's not real?
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally know that they're not real, I guess, but no, that doesn't stop the great horror. I think sucks you in. The thing about horror for me is that I have a low tension for mediocre bad horror, which I think reads poorly, and sometimes, especially in a nostalgic lens or like an historic lens, that's really fun. So when you go back and watch something like Freddy or Jason, I don't know that they really hold up very, very well. I actually think the first Nightmare on Elm Street's pretty well done. There are pretty great scenes in that, but there are stupid ass scenes. That the one with the arms. Remember, Dave, when we did that, we were laughing about that.
I love that.
Oh,
That
that
scared
so
the
much.
shit out of me.
And looking at it through a modern lens, I'm like, this isn't scary, but I like it for the historic reason and for like the buildup of horror and what it became more impressive. And then there are movies like Scream and stuff that are more like teen / horrors and horror movies that were really big in the mid to late 90s and all that. That's kind of how I became comfortable watching horror, was through Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer and everything, and then becoming okay, this isn't that bad, and then kind of go from there. But I do think on the other end of the spectrum, horror has the chance of reaching the highest of highs, like the absolute best of the best. So I think of something like, and Dagan and I talk about it all the time, Midsummer is like, oh my God, I fucking love that movie so much. Like
and Hereditary.
Hereditary is awesome too.
Yeah.
Midsummer, though, is one of those movies. I'm not a guy who goes back and just watches movies over and over again. And I've watched that movie probably a half dozen times, like just eagerly, just staring at it. I just love it. I love everything about that movie. That's probably the biggest example of a recent horror movie where I'm like, this is perfect. This is an absolute fucking masterclass of horror, in my opinion. But as far as older stuff, people know I have a real affinity for the adaptation of the Stephen King short story, Children of the Corn, which I think is maybe my pound for pound favorite horror movie. It's not especially scary. What it is it's creepy and weird about it. Again, I know we've talked about this in the past. I don't mean to be redundant in some, or maybe it was on Knockback we talked about it, but so here would be fine. But just about this idea of a group of kids killing all the adults in a town and basically taking it over. And they have this cult that worships like two of the teenagers that are there, and one is kind of like the heavy and one is kind of like the leader. And I don't know, I really, really dig that. And then of course you go back to something like The Exorcist, which is, I mean, still in my opinion, one of the most amazing films ever. And then there are things that read a little bit differently. Like Dagan and I did The Omen. We were a little softer on that, but we were really, really hot on, and one of my favorite, Rosemary's Baby. See, Rosemary's Baby is one of the examples of a movie that is perfect until the end. And I think horror movies kind of experience that often, but it really, if you look at it as being more about the journey than anything else, that's why I think Midsummer is so good, is because it nails the ending. Like the ending's perfect. Yeah. It's probably the best part. So that's kind of where I stand on horror. I think it has a place. I love it. I loved adopting it more. I was a little bit skittish as a kid. Not really about violence generally, because I liked action movies and shit like that. Like Dagan and I just did RoboCop, and I remember watching that on movie channels and stuff, and that's like hysterically violent.
Yeah.
And things like Terminator and all that. I didn't give a shit about that. There was something about horror, though. Like Dagan and I bring up Nosferatu a lot, the 30s film. I think it's from the 30s, maybe from the 20s. And I used to rent it from the library all the time in like the late 80s, early 90s, and then just not watch it because I was like too scared to do it. I had this like real tense relationship with it. So I understand all of that, but knowing that it's not real, we're not watching a snuff film. The only time I ever watched a film thinking that it was real was when I was in 10th grade and I saw the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
Which when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is real. Fucking perfect marketing for that movie. Just absolutely expert level marketing. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand with it. I love horror. I'm watching, I know you are watching it, or maybe you're already watching it. I'm watching the Fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah.
Which I watched the first I watched the first episode and I was like, I don't know. We're going to keep going, but it didn't strike me as good as I loved Midnight Mass. I thought that was really, really dope. So that guy is clearly obsessed with Catholic horror, which I dig, because I think that is a special type of horror. Probably the scariest type of horror, actually. So I dig that. But so that's all I have to say about the topic, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up both Midsommar and Hereditary, because I feel like those two movies in particular are examples of like truly excellent horror movies they stand on their own, aside from the scary aspects of just being excellent, amazing films. The point with Hereditary in particular, the story I have about that movie is Ben and I were together in Los Angeles at E3 the year before the last year. We were trying to decide how to kill time. We kind of didn't know what to do. We had spent a lot of money. We're like, let's just stay around here. So we're like, let's go see a movie. And I said, oh, this movie's reviewing really well. It's called Hereditary. Let's go see it. I don't know anything about it. It's supposed to be scary. I felt truly, deeply uncomfortable for the entire rest of the day in bright and sunny Los Angeles. I felt truly disturbed. And I think that movie is an amazing movie. It might be 10 out of 10. I will never watch it again, ever. It made me so uncomfortable, and I enjoyed that, but it was almost a step too far in certain ways. And so, Dagan, I'll throw this over to you, because I know we've done a topic about Ari Aster, right? Yeah. We've done a topic about Ari Aster, one of his short films, and I know those are some of your favorites, but of course, however you want to take it.
Yeah, man. When Ari Aster came on the scene, it was a paradigm shift for film. And this is only 5 years ago. So it's really interesting. I mean, I have really inauspicious beginnings with scary movies, because I remember from a very early age. It's interesting when you talk about horror and my personality, because one thing I learned early on as a little kid is I don't do well with gore. I'm way too squeamish. But I really like the idea, dating back to like being 5 or 6, of challenging myself. Because I think you're right, Dust. Horror films are just kind of like the passive version of riding a roller coaster, right? You get all the thrills, you're probably not going to get hurt, actually hurt or die, but you get to enjoy what that feels like, fear. And I remember there was a big 3 growing up that I snuck downstairs to watch on cable way too early. And, a lot of Gen Xers will say this, we kind of, it was some sort of weird self-torture in some sick ways, but we kind of scarred ourselves with this, because
what was it?
My 3 movies that I scared the shit out of myself with when I was a little kid. But that's the
one you snuck downstairs, though? Do you know the name of that one?
What do you mean? Yeah, there's 3. There's
it
three
wasn't like
that
one
I
movie
illicitly
I
had to go
understand.
behind
Okay.
my parents' back. And my
Gotcha.
parents weren't necessarily keeping tabs,
Right.
very 70s parents. They were young. They were kind of oblivious in some way. But the Poltergeist, The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing remake, and to some degree, a bunch of Stephen King stuff that was made for the screen, Cujo, Christine, but especially Carrie. Carrie was the one that I would put with Poltergeist and The Thing, where I realized that my imagination was just way too rich to be putting myself through this, but I had to do it anyway. I just had to scare myself. And that was the beginning of something great. I think the gore was something I just kind of forced myself to endure if that was going to be part of the equation, like with The Thing, because I just really enjoyed the whole experience of these movies. I think it kind of ties in and is kind of inextricably linked to just my love for movies anyway, which started with cartoons and then bled into live action movies and puppets and even horror. But when I look at my list of movies that I wrote down, they definitely all have two things in common. The first thing, they're all visually, beautifully, stunningly shot and realized. They're movies with a strong aesthetic stamp. I would say to a movie, well-made films. And The Shining was the first one I wrote down, Dustin, because I didn't watch that one until I discovered Kubrick later on, let's say in high school or early in college. But The Shining for me is pretty much the perfect film, horror or not. I mean, I think it's one of the perfect movies. And that's another thing in common with my list. I think, again, to a movie, if I wrote down a dozen, these are all just some of my favorite movies. Again, horror be damned. They're just like, I just love these films. But The Shining is an interesting one because I feel like it has everything. From the opening, beautiful tracking shot of the mountains to the performances,
music,
to the quality of the filmmaking, the way you could feel. It was just so thoughtfully put together from its inception, from the storyboards. And, there's something else though. And honestly, I joke about this on Knockback a lot. I'm the dude that's scared of everything. Like, I'm 49 years old. I'm scared of the dark. I'm scared of monsters. I'm scared of aliens. I'm scared of whatever my imagination could conjure. Like, it would be much quicker to just tell you things that I'm not scared of. That would be a much shorter list. But there's something about The Shining. I think when the movie has a certain level of craft and mastery, The Shining doesn't scare me. We talked about this with The Exorcist, too, when we did it on Knockback. There's just something, in that case, William Friedkin, and just being a masterful storyteller, the performances, the atmosphere. There's just something that transcends, I guess, the horror aspect. Here's the litmus test, and you guys could relate to this, I'm sure. If I'm watching a movie by myself at night, and I'll go downstairs for a snack at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm not afraid, the movie's not scary. I'll tell you what changed this whole thing, though, was Ari Aster coming along with Hereditary. Hereditary scares the fucking shit out of me, and it's a beautifully made film. I don't know if I'd put it quite on a Kubrick level, but there is a lot of beautiful craft, and it's just a visionary masterpiece. But it still scares me. There's something about Ari Aster coming along that changed the way I thought about horror movies. And I think Midsommar is really frightening too. His third effort, Beau is Afraid. I know, Dustin, we didn't really talk about that yet. Much more weird and darkly comedic and much less scary. But that he has a very M. Night sort of thing going on with, like, he jumped in with such a bang. You know what I mean? It was such a strong freshman outing for him that I'm not sure he could ever compare to Hereditary for me. I know Colin likes Midsommar better, but I think he's an interesting one, and I'm fascinated with him because I think he's one of the guys, he's one of these filmmakers that I think his filmmaking is oddly personal. I mean, we talked about him a little bit before on Constellation when I made you guys watch one of his early shorts, Something About the Johnsons, or Strange Thing About the Johnsons, which was weird that he's a guy who has ideas, but I also feel like he's working out his trauma on screen. I feel like the guy's got some hangups and he's kind of expunging, he's sharing it with all of us. He's got issues and he's working them out. I just feel like there's something authentic about his filmmaking, and he's somebody who I'm watching out for, because I feel like with his fourth effort, he's going to return to that. I feel like he's got something, that I would put up there with a Kubrick or a De Palma or a John Carpenter or a Wes Craven, one of these guys or a Dario Argento. That's the only other one I really want to talk about on my list, because I should say this, my best friend in the world, dating back to being a teenager, is a huge horror guy. I think where we kind of go in different directions is he's really drawn to the gore. He really likes like a real dark, gory, graphic type movie, and that's just not my bag. But I met a guy early on in my animation career, sort of a colleague of mine, this guy Paul, who was a really big horror buff. And he knew I was a really big film guy, but I didn't really go in for horror necessarily that much. So he was like, dude, I don't understand. You love film, you love movies, you're missing out on this whole genre. And he's the guy who introduced me. This was probably like the mid-aughts, like 2004, 2005. He was like, he introduced me to a lot of stuff going on in Europe at that time. So contemporary horror from Europe. And he introduced me to like the masters like Dario Argento and the whole sort of.
Does his last name start with an S?
What's that? Does
Paul's last name start with an S?
Trying to think.
Because I know a guy named Paul who was super fucking into horror.
Oh, that's interesting. Is he a New York animation dude?
He was all over the place. He's in film now. He's working in film now.
Okay, I think it begins with a P, if I'm not mistaken.
Wasn't that interesting for your audience? It's like, Jesus Christ, I don't fucking know. You gotta call him? Sorry,
but he is an interesting character, because he's one of those guys I think about a lot, but I was never really great friends with him. But because we were shoulder to shoulder in the cubicles working on whatever we were working on, he just had a huge impact on me. And I think he got a kick out of introducing me to a lot of things and seeing my reaction. And he was like, told me about Dario Argento, this Italian master, horror maker that had this run of about 2.5 decades of back-to-back bangers, as far as like, this guy is like one of the greatest and all his movies are great. But if you watch one, watch Suspiria. And that movie, I had to stop watching. I didn't get all the way through it until like 4 or 5 times in. Like, I was that scared of it. And I think because it's so, when you see Suspiria, I won't even ruin it for you guys if you haven't seen it. The original, I understand it's a 2018 remake that's very good, but I haven't seen it yet. But the original is so beautifully, stunningly shot with the lighting and the vibrant colors and all the aesthetic choices. It's almost like a horror version of a Wes Anderson movie. Strangely, it's very weird, but very strongly visually realized. I think that's the only reason that I watched it from back to front finally, because it was just so beautiful. And the score is very haunting and it has a very weird vibe. I understand all his movies are like this, where they're all overdubbed. In other words, they're filmed silently. I know actors and actresses working on his films say like there would be construction going on the adjacent set while we were doing scenes, and it didn't matter because they knew it would be all dubbed later on. So it was really interesting. But that's another one for me. Suspiria, the original 1977 Suspiria, has that visual imprint where, again, it reminds me of something like The Shining or even something like Carrie. And again, maybe the common thing with De Palma and Kubrick is that these guys were just filmmakers. They weren't necessarily just horror filmmakers. They just made films. But that whole thing of craft and excellence and just a beautifully, thoughtfully realized production, the style, everything about it was so cool. And the only thing I'll do as I hand this over to Jaffe is I'll say, I found a movie that I had missed. I was about a year late on it. Do you guys know it? This film Mandy, which reminded me so much of Suspiria.
No, that's Megan you're thinking of, I think.
Megan. No, Mandy.
Oh, no, that's the little AI robot.
The Nick Cage movie.
Yeah, Nick Cage.
It's a Nick Cage. This is the first, I think, Panos Cosmatos. He's a filmmaker. I think Mandy was his second actual film. but it reminded me so. I just remember seeing the trailers in 2019. I think again I was a year late, and it reminded me so much of Suspiria. Just really looked beautiful, and I finally got to see it. And that was the only horror film I've ever seen until, since I saw Suspiria in 2005, 2004, whatever, that had that level of craft in the visuals. Where it's like, it looks like a dream, it looks like, or a nightmare. And it has the Nick Cage, very campy, very over the top Nick Cage performance. That's the punctuation mark on everything, which is I highly recommend it. If I have to recommend two movies, Suspiria and Mandy would definitely be, that would be a fun movie night. Sort of the old school version and the new school version of what horror could be. And yeah, that's it, man. I mean, I could talk about this for hours because I'm a huge fan. But again, the fun thing about horror movies for me is that that dynamic hasn't changed. Something happens, like you plant the seed and give me something to be scared of, and that just grows into a tree. It grows into a garden. Like it's bad. It's actually bad for me, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's well, that's always been the dynamic that I think is the most interesting. So I'm kind of in the middle where I almost like the idea of watching the super scary movies more than I actually like watching them. But then I'm always glad I did. You know what I mean? Holly, on the other hand, is not into that at all. Where I'm trying to remember, there are certain games that I've played where she's like, I don't want to be around. I don't even want to be here while you're playing that. I just don't. It's too stressful, for me. I get that. I definitely think it's not for everyone, but I've said in Jaffe, I want to throw this to you. You're the horror maestro.
Well,
so much.
I don't know about that, but I love horror. I love people who love horror for the most part. It is my favorite genre, and I'll do my best not to ramble. But I have two questions for Dagan first, though. The first one is there I was thinking, I'm sure there is, but can you name like a horror cartoon that works? I don't mean like Monster House or something, but has there ever been an animated piece of horror?
We talk about this a lot. I think it's largely missing because I think who's the guy? Rob Zombie got involved a little bit, and he dabbled in the live action end of this, TV and filmic, but he also dabbled in some of the horror stuff with animation. So I know he kind of breached that and started to develop something, but I just think it could be done so well. Like, it's amazing that's not a full blown segment of this genre. It kind of amazes me because of what you could do with it. It could be a complete flight of fancy, not beholden to the rules of live action filmmaking or even CG necessarily.
I think people end up putting themselves in the box of what they learn from film. I see it in horror video games all the time. I'm usually disappointed by horror video games because they seem to forget that they're video games, and they try to use the tropes of horror filmmaking, which work great if you're controlling the camera and where the audience is looking, and you can build up to a jump scare or whatever. But the tools are very different to scare you in a video game.
Yeah.
And I get more scared playing Elden Ring. And I don't mean that like joking, like thematically, but when you're like running around with like 500,000, whatever they are, not blood orbs, whatever the souls are or whatever. And if you die, you are fucked. Even though I understand there's nothing horror conceptual about it, I think there's a similar brain thing going of just like tension and fear of like, I just need to make it to the next, place where I can level up. Right. I think building horror around the medium, whether it's cartoons or whether it's video games or whatever, I think is very underserved. And the other real quick question is, getting high when you watch horror. Like, I find horror is scarier when you're high. You can get too high and then it kind of just fucks it all up. But I mean, do you watch horror high or no? Does anybody watch it high, or you watch it straight up?
No, I mean, I'm one of those guys that I've gotten high. Like, I could count my entire life on both hands. Like, maybe 8 or 9 times. I'm not the guy for that, but I understand that film Mandy is not only, I understand you're supposed to kind of watch that movie high. I appreciate it completely sober. That's an interesting one too, Jaffe. I'm glad you remembered that film Mandy has some 2D animated segments that I think are supposed to be referential of the original Heavy Metal film, animated anthology film, which obviously is sci-fi, but definitely has some horrific segments in it. I just, every time I think of, a traditionally animated horror film, I think of just expanding what they already did so many decades ago with that initial Heavy Metal movie. And, just, it's such an untapped, it has such untapped potential.
Did they cut the sequence? Am I remembering this right, in Heavy Metal, with the pilots that were the skeletons and the bomber?
Yeah, I remember.
That was filmed, or that was animated, but was that ever actually in the movie?
That was in the movie. Yeah.
That was in the movie.
That was part of the segment. Yeah. The skeletal bomber pilots or whatever.
Yeah, man. That movie was fun.
I think
that was a horror movie when I saw it, because I was so young.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is a cartoon.
The bird with the boobs, baby. That refreshed everything.
Dagan, don't you think you could, obviously I wouldn't call this a horror movie, but a lot of people point to Akira having one of the origins of body horror in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So while it's not necessarily horror, there's some in there. The other one I was thinking of, you could put this in the psychological thriller category, probably more than horror, but the movie Perfect Blue. Have you guys heard of this at all?
Saw it.
Yeah.
Dude, this movie fucking rules. And I always say about this movie is that Darren Aronofsky bought the rights to this movie before Black Swan. And then he made Black Swan and never said anything about Perfect Blue.
Does he still own it?
I don't know.
I'm a big Aronofsky fan, but he's changed a lot.
Dude, the thing about that whole thing to me is that it's clear that he was inspired by this movie, and he wrote something that maybe was a little too inspired. So he wanted to cover himself and bought the rights to Perfect Blue. And so now it's like, when you see both of those movies, you're like, oh, I get it. Like that's exactly what happened. Which, if anyone hasn't seen Perfect Blue, this movie fucking amazing. It's one of those movies that's like eye-opening to how amazing anime films or Japanese animated films just can be in general. Sadly, there's not very many movies like that anymore.
But you do bring up a great point, though. Cartoons, maybe not, but anime does have a lot of horror. There's a very thriving subgenre of horror in anime, which is, I don't know how scary, but it's cool. It's fucking cool. But
yeah, like Berserk is a big one. There's not a real, well, there is anime versions of it, but yeah, the guy he Cloud's sword, the Buster Sword, but original, the actual, where they got the Buster Sword from, and where they got basically the entire visual makeup of Dark Souls is from Berserk. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to do just real quick. I want to let people know something, and then I want to tell you my horror films. But if you like horror and you're listening to this, When Evil Lurks comes out this Friday on Shudder. I have not seen it. Everybody who has seen it, because it's in theaters for like a week before it drops on Shudder, says it is the most disturbing horror film of the year. Really? So it's from the guy who directed a Spanish movie called not Terrifier, but Terrified. And apparently this is the Knees Bees or whatever. So that's coming out. And then I will say there's two kinds of horror I adore. The first is fun horror. I grew up with fun horror. So that's like Freddy, Jason. It's dumb, it's gory, it's silly, and I enjoy that. That to me is the roller coaster ride, right? And when I was a kid, I was scared, but I don't really get scared of horror, and I wish I did. And I think that's why I like pot and horror, because it at least puts an edge on. But I'm always chasing that thing that is going to scare me, right? So there's the fun horror, and then there's also a great movie as Thanksgiving's coming up. There's two movies I recommend. One is Thanksgiving, which is it's so dumb and bad and wonderful. It's about a killer turkey.
This is the one Micah brought up.
Oh, it's delightful. Has she seen it?
Micah talked about this last week, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't see it, but it's delightful. I mean, it's a demon takes over a turkey, and the turkey goes around fucking all these college co-eds. And then the turkey sneaks into the house of the girl, and he kills the father. The turkey kills the father and wears his face. And it's still a turkey running around, but with the face of the father. Yes. And the daughter comes home and she's like, he looks, that's my dad. She doesn't even think that it's a fucking turkey, where it's a delight. And then Eli Roth, speaking of gore, is coming out finally with the Thanksgiving movie that he had in, what was it called? The Tarantino thing he did, the double feature, the Grindhouse thing. There was that wonderful trailer for Thanksgiving, it was called
I never
Thanksgiving.
saw those films. Those are the only Tarantino films I never saw.
Super good.
Well, this was Roth, because remember they joined up and did that double feature. I think was it Roth or was it who did Machete? Robert Rodriguez, right?
Yeah, Machete,
but Roth,
right,
I guess, did the trailer. But anyway, they made a full feature film, and that looks pretty fun too. So anyway, okay, so here's what I love about horror, though, and when I was going to do a horror game, I was doing a lot of research into horror and the history of horror and all that and what makes things scary. And I always heard people talk about the fact that good horror is about something. And I got it, but I didn't really get it. And when I finally got it, the first time I got it was I read this wonderful book about horror, and it was talking about the soldiers coming home from World War I. And that was the first time in society, at least most societies, that technology had caught up enough that we could, have amputees and people's faces reconstructed that got hit by a bullet or whatever. And so suddenly you had society, being shared with folks who were very disfigured. And a lot of the horror of that era, apparently that kind of body horror, was inspired by sort of an undercurrent of cultural unease about how do we feel about this. And once that was explained to me, I started kind of seeing why the real horror that works. And I started going, so my three favorite horror films, Poltergeist, which I showed my kids recently, and it still holds up clearly because they really dug it. There's a movie called Host, or The Host, which is 2020. 5 or 6 girls get on Zoom because it's the pandemic, and they have a seance and they hire a medium, and shit goes crazy. And then Jacob's Ladder from the early 90s with Tim Robbins, which, but I realize, why are those so powerful to me? And fundamentally, I think that does go to the heart. It's almost like you can look at your favorite, not your favorite, but the films that affect you the most, the horror films that affect you the most, and go, there's a deep dive psychological lesson in that, because all three of those films are really about the normal flipped upside down. And I think my biggest fear is that disengagement with reality, of not really knowing what's going on, of not really knowing, is this real, of having some kind of mental stroke thing. Obviously stroke is mental, but a brain bleed, and just everything that you think is normal gets strange. And I both am fascinated by that, and I love that, and it terrifies me. So I think when you look at horror that way, it's delightful, and it's helpful. The last three quick things I'll say, I haven't seen the movie Skinamarink. I hear it's
I wanted to mention that. The idea, analog horror, that this thing, because it's kind of started on YouTube. It's like this new subgenre. Now we have a movie in that. I know, Jaffe, do you know, what is it called? It's called, Local 58. Have you heard of this YouTube channel?
Is this the backroom stuff?
No. So yeah, it's related it's a similar type thing, but Local 58 is a YouTube channel that is a series of all analog horror, where it's supposed to look like this, late 90s news station that keeps getting taken over, and all these weird.
I have seen that. I didn't know it was called that, but yes, that stuff's great. And I think that, that's a great example of, why is that horror catching on? Why what do they call it? Liminal horror, with like the back rooms catching on. Mm-hmm. And I do think you can do, and I'm sure horror people and podcasts have done many deep dives on it, of like, what is it saying? Like, my kids are all into the analog horror and into the liminal horror. And it's like, what does it say about Gen Z? It's everybody likes it, but they're the ones who really brought it to prominence on the internet. What about their experience with, I don't know, post 9/11 and school shootings and social upheaval in America, or nothing? I just wonder why that's caught on so much. But that's one of the reasons I just adore horror. Even if you look at like Get Out, I don't know if I would call it horror, it's a thriller and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that's a movie that I think is just, you know, I mean, it's, you know what it's about in terms of sort of what it really is about. And it's just what a great use of the genre. And here's what I'm excited by. So Blumhouse, if you guys know Blumhouse, Jason Blumhouse does all the horror, and his whole thing was like, look, I'm going to give filmmakers a lot of freedom. As long as they don't fuck the budget, I don't give a fuck. You know, go be creative, you know? And so that's where Get Out came from. And that's where that Happy Birthday Groundhog Day movie came from. And he recently hired Zach Wood, who was the executive producer on Twisted Metal.
Santa Monica. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you stealing my candy? Okay, take it. Oh, okay. I have a big bowl of candy. To run Blumhouse games. So I'm excited to see if maybe he's got a way to do horror games different. But anyway, Skinamarink, I haven't seen. I hear it's boring, but the trailer is the only thing in the last 10 years that scared me.
Yeah.
Like I remember it's that trailer where it's just like in this house.
In this house.
And it's just
Yeah, I sent you this when it came out last year.
Oh my goodness gracious.
The movie's
I remember.
terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm scared of everything, Jaffe, but that movie is
did it.
actually properly terrifying.
I agree.
It feels like
the movie's worth watching. The movie's worth watching.
It's totally worth watching. And you're a similar age to me. It really I don't know how a young Canadian kid in his 20s did this, but it feels like you're a kid in the 70s and you're having a nightmare. It just
That's awesome.
It feels like this formless, shapeless, you can't see much.
That's a pop movie, baby.
It's really I think this guy, he's a really interesting kid because he took himself off of Wikipedia. You could still find Skinamarink on there, but he took his name off. He has no link to his name. So I don't know. He made this film for like 15 grand.
Yeah.
It blew up. He made a few million for IFC, whoever put it out. And yeah, he came off of YouTube. He had a YouTube, like a creepypasta channel.
Okay, everybody, we're back again. Very different, a much smaller lineup. So basically what happened is Jaffe, his computer is totally screwed up. Something about his C drive keeps filling up, and we were trying to fix it, and it just wasn't working out. He was like, I can keep trying, but I got 30 megabytes. I was like, you know what? Let's just, we'll have you back soon. And then something came up for Colin, nothing to worry about, but he needed to bow out for the rest of the episode. So Dagan, I think this is the opportunity. It started as CLS, then it became LSM. Now it's DLS for.
I love it.
DLS.
This is the coup. This is the coup opportunity we were waiting for, Dust.
Yeah, this is exciting. And so we were just trying to figure out, like, Dagan's topic. I think we were like, should we do your topic? Should we do something else? And we decided we're gonna do the topic. This is honestly is exciting, Dagan. I love this one-on-one dynamic right now we've got. This is
who knew? This is the excitement you come for LSM. Who knew it was going to turn? And then there were two. And listen, there were two. We don't need that amateur hour shit. Those guys. This is all we need. This is like this could be punching up with two. This could be knockback. It's you instead of Kyle.
Right.
Whatever you want to say. This is all we need.
Exactly. This is all you need. We're gonna take this opportunity. We're gonna run with it. But Dag, we decided we want to do your topic. We may have some tangents, but that's just what we're just going with the wind. So Dag, tell me about your topic.
Yeah. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about karaoke. And this is an easy breezy one, man. This could be for you and I. This could be for another episode. This could fit in anywhere. Right. And here's why I dwell on this topic so much. I have a very funny relationship with karaoke. Let me explain, Dust. So I think it's fair to say, although I've been at events or karaoke places or bars or whatever, and been a part of a group doing karaoke, I don't think I've ever actually got up to the mic and done karaoke myself. I've never done it, although I'm a big fan and I think it's super fun. And I love being with friends, whether that was coworkers in New York, we'd skip over to little Tokyo or Koreatown, hit the karaoke, sort of place or whatever, or just, being at a bar, college days, whatever. This is nothing new, but I have this, I don't know if it's a hang up. It's a block of some kind. I don't really mind, like when we do our LSM events, our live events, our meet and greets, getting on stage and talking. I have no problem with public speaking, but when it comes to two things, when it comes to performing, I guess, I get really shy. Singing and dancing. You're not going to see me dancing at this wedding, Dust. Slow dance with the wife or the daughter, that's one thing. I don't know. I have this self-conscious thing with performing. I don't know. It's not I enjoy it. I like watching other people do it, but it's just, I feel like it's not for me. But with dancing, honestly, I don't really mind. Karaoke, I want to get over this. So I want to tell you a little more about this, but when I kick it over to you as part of your thing, maybe you could impart a little advice, how I could just kind of, I don't know, loosen up when it comes to this. What is my problem with this? I don't know. Here's the thing why it bothers me.
Yeah.
I do this thing weekly. I'm not even, I won't say daily because that could be a little bit of an exaggeration, but daily, I think, weekly at least, I think to myself, I'll hear a song. I love music, right? I'll hear a song and I'll say, that's a hidden gem for karaoke. Why has nobody thought of that song? I have a laundry list of karaoke songs that I feel like would be amazing for karaoke that I don't hear. So I do this running game with myself, which is like, oh, that song would be great for karaoke. Why does nobody do that song? Oh, nobody ever thought of this song. And I've been doing this for so long that I remember talking to Nick Scarpino about this when Colin was still kind of funny. Like me and Nick would have this conversation. I'd be like, dude, I have this thing with karaoke where I just have this laundry list of songs that I actually keep written down, by the way, that would be great for karaoke, but I just can't break through the embarrassment of getting up there and performing it. I can't do it, you know? Mm-hmm. And I mean, this list of song ranges from 80s pop 40, top 40 standards, Peter Gabriel, Pink Floyd, anything by the Supremes, Diana Ross, I'm a huge fan. Public Enemy, anything by Tribe Called Quest, Duran Duran, you name it, Sinatra, the old crooners, all that kind of stuff. And this could go to glam rock, hair metal, all these things. I think of all these ideas, but I just can't do it. I have no experience actually getting up. I imagine maybe the first time I get up to the mic and just do it, right? Just kind of get through that barrier, that sort of block, and just do it for the first time. Might be difficult, but once I sort of tempt fate and try it out and I get through like a 3-minute performance, then maybe the floodgates open and I'm less embarrassed for the next time. I don't know.
Yeah, it's about breaking the seal. Gotta do it once and then maybe you'll become the karaoke addict.
Who knows? I mean, I could see it being super fun if I could just get past the I look like an idiot thing. But I think part of this, and I'll do this, you guys probably have noticed this with Constellation, I'll do this as sort of a therapy thing. I'll say, I'll introduce a topic, but part of this is me maybe getting some wholesome advice on my problem. And in this case, just can't do the karaoke. Although I love it. I have all these ideas, all these great ideas about, oh my God, why does nobody do this song? This is the perfect karaoke song and my perfect karaoke song list. But for some reason, I just can't work up the courage. So I'll kick it over to you in whatever way you want, but maybe part of this is you kind of, impart a little bit of wisdom. I don't know. Help me out.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting topic, especially for me recently, where being in Japan, the home of karaoke in a lot of ways, and how different, not only just karaoke is in general, but from a cultural perspective on how they view singing in a lot of ways. The main thing when I was there talking to two different guys, shout out to Knox and my boy Evan, two guys that live in the Kyoto area that I hung out with from their Last Stand patrons. So I had a great time hanging out with them. And the one thing that I can't remember which one of them said it, but we were talking about karaoke, that there's this thing in Japan where no one cares if you sound bad for karaoke. It's not about that at all. In fact, the element of performance is so toned down in Japan where you go there and you pay to rent a room where you and your friends sit and sing for each other. There's no, I mean, sure, there probably is more like public karaoke bar type atmospheres, but it's not the open mic night situation where you're singing in front of a crowd of random people that are there drinking and yingling and having some wings or something like that. You know, it's not quite like that. And the thing that he told me, they're like, literally, seriously, no one cares. It's a very, I don't know if it's just Western or American perspective to be like, oh, but how do I sound? You know, am I on pitch? Stuff like that. And I really like that. This is like, it's about having fun purely. Being willing, maybe it's okay to look a little or sound a little stupid, you know? And don't get me wrong, I'm the same way where the only karaoke per se that I've really done consistently was Rock Band growing up. I mean, Rock Band, we got big when I was in 8th grade, and I played Rock Band like pretty much all the way up till the end of high school because there's, you know, multiple versions and stuff like that. But that was kind of what made me feel more comfortable even just singing in front of other people. And it was kind of an interesting thing where while you were the only one singing, you were at least still participating with other people. So you kind of had this in it together feeling, even though if you're the only one singing. And that was a lot of fun. Dude, so many songs that I love. I remember singing like Weezer songs on Rock Band and learning a bunch of cool songs. And also just learning like, oh, I cannot sing this song. That's where it maybe does get a little embarrassing. It's you're like, oh man, okay, I'm gonna have to falsetto this because it's just too high. But I've always been curious about the open mic night, which is not quite karaoke, I guess, because open mic usually people are playing guitars and stuff like that. But I guess there is kind of like karaoke type stuff at bars. I don't know if I would want to. I don't know if I'd want to do or participate in that. In just that, I don't care about hearing random strangers try to sing "Sweet Caroline" when they're 4 or 5 beers deep. That doesn't really sound all that fun to me. But Dagan, I have an idea. Last Stand sings at the next live event. Maybe we forced you to do stand up. Let's get the crew. You know, each member of the crew throughout the night. That's kind of the interstitials, is the karaoke of the crew. That would be,
dude. I
something.
love it. You gotta sometimes you gotta force. I mean, with me, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes you gotta force me. You gotta just force my hand. That's a great example. I also love what you said about just expectation. Like, it's so silly because nobody's expecting you to go out there and be like Pavarotti or Dean Martin. Like, why? Like, look at it like this. I just thought of this. Wintertime comes, or at least, in our neck of the woods, usually. Ice skating rinks. You go ice skating. Nobody really knows how to do it. You know what I mean? No one expects you to go out on the ice with your kids and be, I was going to say Tanya Harding. That's a bad example. Brian Boitano. Nobody expects you to go out there figure skating and doing figure eights and twirls and loops. You just go out there and try to stay on your feet, right? So, and you know what? You remind me of something very important, a very important aspect to this. I think Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation was my actual introduction to this. I never knew about it, but you were saying, especially in Japan, there's private karaoke booths. You just go in, bottle service, you and your friends. Mm-hmm. You're not beholden to anyone else looking. And also the idea of alcohol as that social lubricant. Of course, right. I'm not immune to that. So that's the thing. If you guys get me plied up with liquor at the event, that'll help. I didn't have to do that for the comedy routine, but getting on stage and talking, the public speaking thing, it doesn't really bother me. I talk anyway. Who cares? But it's the performing thing. But just get a few beers, a few old fashions deep, and then that's it. The night is ours, my friend. So I like that idea, and especially if I go with the ammunition of, I don't know, maybe you break the ice with something that's easy to do, like a rap song where you don't have to be pitch perfect or something like that. And then you sort of incrementally increase the difficulty. I don't know. There's some strategy, but that's been my big regret for a couple of decades now, where it's like, why why do you, first of all, dwell on this thing constantly? You would think I'm this, consummate karaoke guy, the way I got my little list and the way I'm calling out songs and saying, why aren't you thinking of this song? That one's played out, that type of thing. But I got this armchair karaoke thing. I'm not entitled. I'm a karaoke poser is what I'm saying. Right.
So I have I have multiple questions and comments we can kind of put in here. First of all, the one thing I realized, I actually did recently do my first official karaoke. So in Japan, there is a small theme park right outside of the big baseball stadium in Tokyo.
Oh, where the Giants play.
Yeah. Oh, Yomiuri. Yeah. I can't remember what that place is called, because there's a roller coaster that I rode there called the Thunder Dolphin. Oh, it's called Tokyo Dome. Duh.
Tokyo Dome. Okay.
Yeah. So there's the Thunder Dolphin. It's this roller coaster that it feels like you're riding on top of buildings in Tokyo. It's amazing. It was one of the most unique and awesome roller coasters ever. While we were there, though, we wanted to ride the Ferris wheel, and we learned there are select Ferris wheel cars that have karaoke in them. Yeah. So Holly and I went on the Ferris wheel, just the two of us, and we did the karaoke while you're going on top of the buildings in this Ferris wheel.
Love that.
Dude, it was great. Holly sang the Neon Genesis Evangelion theme, which she's very good at, because when we were watching the series the first time, she was like learning it in Japanese. So very nerdy. And then I did Backstreet Boys, I Want It That Way. And it was an amazing time, which fuck Colin for dissing the Backstreet Boys a few weeks ago. I want to reiterate that. I said it to his face then. I'll say it to him when he's not here. I don't give a fuck. Don't diss the Backstreet Boys. That's good shit.
I don't know the difference between them and NSYNC. Which one was Justin Timberlake part of?
That's NSYNC.
Okay. All right. I don't know the difference. I honestly don't know the difference. I think of them... That's like the net. I'm New Kids on the Block. I'm so old, right? So that's like, dude,
I've seen them before. Actually, I've seen them twice with my mom. Boys? No, New Kids on the Block.
Come on,
dude. Yeah, I'm not really into. They're not nostalgic for me. So I think, I kind of feel like, obviously they're cheesy. I think that's undeniable. But I went with my mom to see New Kids on the Block and Backstreet Boys together, and I was all pumped to see Backstreet Boys. 'Cause I'm like, yeah, I love that. My mom listened to Backstreet Boys when I was in like first grade.
Yeah.
We had a great time listening. So I was like, I think that was in 8th grade, maybe. I went to see that. And then again, they played in Pittsburgh, New Kids on the Block. It was like $10 maybe.
Holy shit.
Thought, well, I'll go to see anyone practically for $10.
$10.
So I saw New Kids on the Block then too. But
there's something about that I really love, because you want to say like my parents went and saw Santana or Zeppelin in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. Or having been to one of the few Beatles shows, like my mom missed the opportunity to do when she got grounded when she was 16. But there's those consummate things where you can say, I was there for that. But then there's that resurgence thing where being there for a band when they get their second life, there's just something cool about that. And I'm not a big concert guy. Personally, like my daughter, forget it. That's her whole bent on life. Like she has to go to concerts, and she's so passionate. But yeah, there's something about
happy
that
to hear that generation still care. I think that's kind of an intrinsic human value, honestly, to just care about, performance and enjoying art in that way. But that makes me happy.
She's like a year. I'm not even exaggerating. She's like a year out with concert plans. Like I think the furthest one from now is she's seeing Taylor Swift, this is ridiculous, in Toronto next November.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Dang.
Kind of weird that's already kind of locked in stone from a from a performer or a venue perspective. But they got it. Her and her friends got it all plotted out.
Nice.
And traveling down to Miami, Toronto, like, I understand it. Like it's the what better way can you express your fandom than being there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be like if you could you see your favorite movie while it's being shot. It's not a thing. Mm-hmm. So I get it. It's a very special thing. But yeah, man. You know what though? Did we do concerts as a topic?
Yeah, I think that was earlier in maybe the first 5 episodes.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Yeah,
that seems like a hard one to miss.
Dagan, let's get deep here, because this was one of the other thing I wanted to ask you, because I feel like we're kindred spirits in this. And this actually, Jaffe might save this topic. I don't want to get into it, but his topic before he had, all the technical issues was asking about song lyrics that we loved.
Love this topic.
And so I don't know if I'm going to be on that episode or not. I don't want to do his topic right now, but it's connecting. There's a song I really love from Jimmy World called A Praise Chorus. And it's about being, at least the way I read it or how it makes me feel, is about being kind of a timid, self-conscious person, but equally feeling ambitious at the same time. And just kind of like, oftentimes you just need that little push, and I feel like, this karaoke thing, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you here, but I feel like there is this thing where we're both kind of timid, shy people to some degree, very, nervous about what people think about us and stuff like that. But there is this innate, like, well, I also really want to do awesome things. I want to have fun. I got to just push myself into that. And then it's always like, well, yeah, I'm glad I did that. Because I'm sure that's how you felt about doing stand-up too.
Yes.
You were very, very scared and you're like, holy shit, I did that. Yes. Why did I ever feel like I didn't want to do that or I couldn't do that? You know?
Yeah. You know what? There's really something very interesting there about, just kind of breaking free of your hang up. I think the public speaking thing, like if it's one of my kids or somebody close to me that I know that struggles with that, they got to do a little thing at school or something or at work, then I just try to channel this feeling that I think extends to all these things that we're talking about, where if you could just impart this sense of, it doesn't really even matter if I embarrass myself, if I stutter, if I trip on stage, if I say the wrong thing, if I mispronounce a word, who cares? It's that whole idea that you hear, that classic vaudeville stage or Hollywood thing of just imagine the audience in their underwear type of thing. Like reverse the sentiment of embarrassment. But there is something there for me that I feel, there's an inhibited thing, which is interesting, Dust, because I know I always bring it around to skateboarding, but I think I always just have to throw it back to what I know. And that is a very strange dynamic that even as a kid, dating all the way through my 20s and 30s when I was actively skateboarding, at least on a weekly basis, let's say, there was always this thing of, I didn't care if I was in the suburbs. I didn't care if I was in New York, if I was in Brooklyn, if I was downtown in Philly, if I was out west in LA. I didn't care if I fell on my ass in front of hundreds and hundreds of pedestrians in the city center or whatever while I was skating a bench or skating a rail or skating stairs. If I fell down, I didn't get embarrassed. Who gave a shit? Right. Yeah. So there was this sense of being comfortable, right? Which does not oddly extend to karaoke or like the dance floor at the wedding. It's really a strange hang up where I could kind of have almost this one personality for this thing. And I have a whole nother personality or inhibitions for this other thing, which is really strange that I can't just carry over a little bit of that skateboarding mentality and be like, all right, dance and have fun and be goofy. Who cares what you look like? I don't know.
Right.
And it's not, I think for some people, it's just, at least they dismiss it or they try to make it appear like, oh, I'm too cool for that. It's definitely not that with me at all. In fact, I would think of it in the reverse sense of like, I don't know if I'm cool enough. I don't know if I'm cool enough for that, right? Type of thing. So it is, I think, I know what you're saying makes me feel better because I think a lot of it is just jumping in and doing it that first time, second time, third time, incrementally gets a little easier. Maybe you make yourself look like a fool. You realize that's not the end of the world, that whole thing. But the thing is about it, dancing, not so much. But with the karaoke, and maybe I save the dancing topic for another time because it's kind of an extension of this topic, but a little different. But with the karaoke thing, what's hurt is that I think I really want to do it. Hence keeping these lists and thinking of a new song and getting jazzed when I hear a song and I'm like, that would be the perfect karaoke vehicle, and then you're like, you're not. And then, in the next breath, I'm like, you're not doing that, dude. Come on. you're too self-conscious, or you know what I mean? You can't you tell somebody else to do it. You'll give it to Nick Scarpino, whoever you're talking to, right? So it's like, yeah, man, I think I love the idea of an LSM thing, because now you got to do it. Everybody's doing it. Yeah. And you're not embarrassing yourself, like you're saying, in front of the random 14 or 15 strangers sidled up to the bar. You're doing, maybe we have 200 people there, 300 people. How many people were in Houston?
We have home field advantage.
See,
I
like that. Yeah, I like that. For karaoke, I like that. For stand-up, I felt like it was a little unfair because those people like us anyway.
Sure.
I didn't have the experience of this nobody going into a comedy club and nobody knows who you are. So your stuff, what you're bringing, the content, what you're saying has to be good. You got to bring your A game, because these people have no sort of emotional tie to you. They're not rooting for you, right? Yeah. So the comedy thing in Houston was kind of a fake experience, but it worked out in my benefit. And I also really appreciate it because it is encouraging.
Right. You had a gentle first experience, we'll say.
Yes, very much so.
You had little baby gloves, but that's okay. That's what you needed in order to get in there, because honestly, like, the thought of jumping into the deep end of the pool where it's like no one knows, he's like, that might be too much. Dagan, you touched on something I wanted to speak on real quick. Is just this the idea of being like, it's not that I'm too cool, that's too cool for me. This is something that at least growing up, I really struggled with in particular, is that I always was shy, didn't want to do things like that, didn't want to make myself stand out. And I know that I have talked to people that they're like, my first impression of you was that you were stuck up or that you didn't want to talk to me. I'm like, no, that is always the exact opposite. The reason I wasn't saying anything is because I was scared. Or like I was like, oh no, if I do something or say something, what will people think about me or whatever? And it's like, man, it sucks that I had the exact opposite effect of that. So I was, I'm glad to hear you say that there's other people that felt that way, but let's bring up the dance thing.
Okay.
Just a little bit. We don't need, because I think it could be a whole topic, but
yeah, it could be
at the wedding.
Okay. Yeah.
I think there is dancing at the wedding. Is that correct? Or are we, throwing down at the wedding in any way?
It's bad. This is where it gets bad because Helene loves to dance. My wife loves to dance. Literally, I've known that since day one, because when I met Helene, we were both in art school, both in Philly downtown, and she was already very good. I was friends with one of her roommates. So it was kind of in a roundabout way how I met Helene, but I knew from very early on, from just being that age, very early 20s, going to clubs, going to bars, like she loved to dance. So that was always a thing that I had to reckon with, because I was always very awkward when it came to dancing. I think something I haven't said in this conversation that is important for me to translate is that I have a couple of talents. Anything musically involved has nothing to do with, like, I am the least musically inclined person you'll ever meet when it comes to singing, playing an instrument, reading music, dancing. I don't know if rhythm plays into it, but I just don't have that. I don't have those gifts. Like, music it's really the thing I admire most in people when they have that talent, because it's so foreign to me. It really is. It's like a thing that I just was not born with any kind of musical savvy. But Helene, not only is she musically inclined, so are my kids. Like, they could just read music. They could jump on a piano and play things by ear. That's so weird to me. I remember looking at a piano, Dust, when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I remember this very distinctly. My grandma's next door neighbor, or I should say across the street, they had a basement in their basement. They had a piano, and it was a beautiful piano. And I remember my grandma's friend playing it, and I would just be like, I have no idea how you do. And like, it was just like this thing of like, what foreign language are you speaking right now? And that was just a thing. Like, I just wasn't, I could draw, I could write, whatever, but I can't do that. So that's the thing that I'm going to be faced with. This is the only time, luckily, that I'm ever faced with this, is that at these events like weddings or celebrations where my wife and now my daughter, they love to dance. I mean, my daughter dances competitively. She dances 5 days a week. This is her whole thing. She's only looking at schools where she can minor in dance. Like, that's how important dance is in my family. And I won't get out on the dance floor because I feel like the biggest idiot, in the world. So this is where it's going to be. Now, my sister's wedding in May, they got me on the dance floor for one song. And I felt like an idiot, but I just got through it. So I'm hoping to dodge, this whole time. I'm actually starting to worry about it. This is 4 days away. This is already starting to play on my mind. Like, how am I going to avoid this? Am I going to go smoke a cigar with the boys? How do I be strategic? Then I got to do this whole thing where I come back for the slow song because I don't mind doing the slow dance. Then it's the whole thing of, but I did dance. I danced with you. I said, I know I promised I danced with you. Right? So you got to time it to hit the slow songs.
Sure.
Get out of Dodge for the actual dance songs. It's not going to be easy, man. What I'm wondering, what I don't know though, that I'm very interested in? I don't remember seeing Colin dance ever. But I don't know if he has an aversion to it like I do. I don't think he does. I don't think he minds dancing. But I don't think I've ever seen him dance as an adult, as a grown man. Let's see. I got married 21 years ago. So he would have been, he was 18, 17.
Dang.
Right?
Yeah.
So I haven't seen him dance as an adult. Not really. I don't think he danced at our sister's wedding a few months ago. So that's interesting too. So so I'm always, that's a dynamic that doesn't really mesh with Helene and I, where I do wish I was a little less inhibited, at least for her. But at this point, I just feel like I'm 49 years old. Like, this is just part of my personality. How do I break this? I don't know. It's like not dancing is part of my identity. I feel like at this.
Yeah, I think there's an element to, well, I don't know, because I think this is maybe where we differ in that I've been to weddings where there's a DJ and no one's dancing. I'm not going to be the guy that goes up there and be like, oh yeah, we're going to start it. I'm not going to be that. I'm not that bold. But if there's dancing already going on, then hell,
you're okay with that.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Now, there's another element to this that I'm curious. I don't know. Okay. So especially now, I mean, I've always danced at weddings and had good time, but obviously once you can drink, that's going to be an element to it as well. Not that I've ever been trashed at a wedding or anything like that, but it definitely loosens your inhibitions as far as going crazy, having a good time. I think there should be agreement at weddings that it's like, we're all going to look really fucking dumb if we're all dancing. We're just going to. We're not dancers. We're just, trying to have a good time. Leave your phones at the table. We don't need to make evidence of us looking like idiots. Just leave them at the table.
Any of that.
Maybe the photographer will snap a few photos. Okay, that's fine. But we don't need to be videoing people at the dance floor. Let's leave the memory of this night in our minds. Now done, we all looked dancing, having a good time. That's where I'm kind of. I'm not gonna, if we're at the wedding and people are dancing and I'm dancing and someone pulls out a phone, I'm not gonna go slap it out of their hand. But that's fine. I'm okay at this point. If it's posted online, that's fine. But
we don't need to document it though.
Right.
No, I agree, dude. And I think I do agree with you. Like, the static shot, the photo is less egregious than the video. But it would be better if we didn't have anything. And the video could be really harmful, actually, because if I see how goofy I look dancing and I'm trying to break out of this rut, this mental barrier that I have, and then I see that, that's all I need.
You're like,
I'll never dance
I
again.
look 10 times more stupid than I thought. Yeah, I've
We'll
been there. I know
again.
exactly what you mean.
That would be really bad. Like, and I think I might have to explain it that way to people. Like, if I see that, I may not dance with my kids at their weddings. I might not dance for another 30 years. Now I got to work on it. The whole cycle, and the trauma and working out my issues and exercising my demons. Now we got to go back to square one. I don't need, no, that would be bad. I do not need, and I could see, I could see my wife, she's full of hijinks, that one. I could see her doing that. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing about this wedding in particular is that it's Colin and Micah's wedding, and we have obviously many listeners out there that are going to be curious, because I like to post photos just from weddings in general post a photo of Holly and I, maybe some people that I see. But like all eyes are going to be on the people rightfully want to know like, hey, what's going on? How's Colin's wedding going? Like, what's it look like there? What kind of time are they having? I'm like, I don't know. It's going to be different. I don't want to post photos for people. I usually do those for me. There's a stink bug on my light. Get out of here.
They're obnoxious this time of year.
When Jaffe was talking about horror stuff, I spotted it and I thought it was a giant spider. And you can see there's a jump reaction from me in this podcast.
Talk about jump scares.
The stink bug is gross, but I'm not fearful of it. I just don't like it. I don't want it to be here.
Yeah, if
it was a spider that was that big, fuck that. That's a different story then at that point. But we'll let the stink bug crawl.
You look at a stink bug and I automatically think that is one of those things like a cockroach that has not changed since the day of the dinosaurs. Like that's just an ancient thing. It's disgusting. You know what I mean? How did it evolve to this point? They do this time of year. They try to come in because they're trying to get out of the cold as the weather shifts. Right, dude. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, what you say about the wedding is interesting too. Like, you know what I love about it? I think I did mention this to Colin the other day. His wedding in particular, but I think this is often the case in weddings with people coming from out of town, 2 different families, 2 different sets of friends. Like this is kind of a merging, like a mashup of legendary characters that we haven't had before, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
People are going to be crossing paths that never been in the same room. People that we talk about on the podcast, friends and family, Colin's best friend and my best friend growing up meeting for the first time. Like this is like really these legendary players in our lives being together for the first time ever. That's pretty incredible. I said, you know, you and Mike are also getting married. That too is kind of important. More importantly, are these like, you know, this kind of mixing of all these people and friends and family just all celebrating something together, kind of under the same roof for 4 or 5. It's a very charming idea. So, and I do think if I could just break out of that rut of being too inhibited to enjoy dancing, same thing with karaoke. I think that's what hurts, is knowing that I would get even more enjoyment out of it if I could brush that off as I don't care what I look like. Who cares? Just have fun. You know? And maybe that's what the alcohol's for. That's all.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
Right. Social lubricant, loosen up.
Yeah.
Get in the groove.
We had a conversation on Sacred because someone was like, how I'm trying to remember how they put it. Like no, it wasn't just how drunk. It was like how much debauchery will happen at or something like that. It's like, listen, you definitely, there's like a firm line, you know, you do not want to be the drunkest person. Well, I would say almost ever. It's probably, unless it's like your bachelor party or something like that, your best bet. People will remember the drunkest person and the things that they that happens. That was something when we were at E3. At all the, you know, you go to all these parties where they have free alcohol and stuff, and it's like, you definitely want to take advantage, but don't take too much advantage because everyone remembers the person that can barely walk out of the Bethesda event at E3. Because I saw that, like, who is that person that just got trashed? But same thing.
It's a great
at a wedding. You want to have a great time. You want to get loose, enjoy the alcohol, the generous gift of, you know, the open bar, but can't get too out of hand.
It's a great point.
Dude, I've seen some shit though when at weddings that I've filmed.
That's like, right. You did all that.
Yeah, like grooms that like cannot really stand well anymore. And I'm like, you are gonna have a horrible time later. You have done a bad thing probably. So
it's hard because you do gotta find that fine line. But you know what I say, especially for all you younger guys and gals out there listening, I'll impart a bit of wisdom that I think I have for this. Treat everything like it's a work party, like a work Christmas party. And here's what I mean. Enjoy yourself. Have some drinks. They're probably going to be free, right? They're on your boss. Beautiful dinner, beautiful event. You're hanging out. Maybe you dressed up like you don't usually get to do for work. And enjoy it, but don't be the drunkest person there. Mm-hmm. It's almost like speeding on the highway. If you want to go 85, wait for that idiot going 95. Then go 85, right? Because you're not going to get pulled over. The 95 guy is going to get pulled over. So, Yeah, you got to just kind of treat everything like that. Like just pretend it's a work event where you could have a good time, but not too good.
Right.
And then just wait for those 1 or 2 people, Uncle Rich, whoever it is that's getting a little out of hand, Aunt so-and-so, and just be a couple of drinks less than them. You'll be golden. That's it. Pace yourself. It's like the pace car, right? You got to pace yourself accordingly. So that usually does seem to work. And I've seen horror stories from good friends of mine, and they just got out of hand at work parties, and it's just coming back after January that's usually a Christmas party thing. And I feel like, thank God we're not going back to like January 3rd, because that's the stigma is going to wear off a little bit, the sting. But it's always like that walk of shame when you go back into the office and you were the one that acted out, right? You don't want to be that person. No. So,
yeah, definitely moderation in all things. But yeah, honestly, I'm just so I realize we're talking about this when this episode releases on Monday for our patrons, then the wedding will have been over at that point. But I'm just so excited to get together. I think everyone from the company minus Maddie will be there.
I think that's right.
So, man, to be all together, it's gonna be
fun.
I can't wait. So, Dag, unless there's anything else you want to put in here, this is probably a good point to wrap things up. Any final?
I had a great time. I kind of low-key like how this shook out. I mean, it's interesting if nothing else. Who knew that this was gonna be the arc?
Right.
I mean, this is
who knew?
Crazy. This is crazy even for us, even for Last Stand Media. I mean, the kind of funny guys would never do this.
Yeah, I gotta say, Dag, I don't want to. I'm not trying to butter you up or anything, but I feel like, you and I, we have special connection. I feel like when you and I at Too Many Games, we went out, had a nice dinner. I'm like,
that was fun.
I always liked you, but after I was like, Dag and I are bros. So I'm glad we
absolutely.
just get to do this 40 minutes here at the end. This is fun.
This is super fun.
Yeah. So let's wrap up Constellation for this week with Dagan and I here at the end. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We super appreciate it. Of course, if you want early access to the show, you can go to patreon.com/laststandmedia, where you can get early access to all kinds of stuff. If you like Dagan and I together, you can listen to Punching Up. I've resisted asking you about Mario Wonder at the end. We'll save that for Punching Up, because,
we have a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about. But yeah. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be back next week with a full crew. But until then, we'll see you later. Bye.
Constellation is a product of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by and is directed and hosted by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is my brother, Dagan Moriarty. The show is produced by Last Stand's executive producer, Dustin Furman, and is edited by associate producer, Ben Smith. All Last Stand theme music is by Ramon Narvaez, and all of our graphics and logos are by Dagan Moriarty. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's podcasts, including Constellation, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest support tier, and we're infinitely grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor.